What's up, Noel Nation? Florida State's 2025 football schedule is here. Do we love it? Do we hate it? Did we get the double middle fingers from the ACC, Michael? We are here to break all that down for you guys in this episode. Thank you for joining us, Noel Nation. I'm Jesse. That's Michael. We are Plant the Spear. And Michael, this is the fun time of the year when the schedule finally drops. Like we talked about before, you already know the opponents, you already know the home and away, but the order of operations is still a mystery until the schedule drops. And this is when it gets fun because you can really start planning those fall trips and the games you want to attend. If you're not able to go to every single one, you kind of see how things lay out because, as we've said before, it does make a difference how things shake out, with the order of operations. And, we talked about it in a previous episode where we liked the front half of the schedule, but the second half of the schedule wasn't exactly as friendly as we had kind of hoped for. So we're going to jump into all that today. We're going to do some overall thoughts on the general layout of the schedule. We're going to give you guys a game by game look at each opponent. Of course, it's way too early to be making any final decisions here, but there are some things that I found that make me feel one way or another about kind of some early outlooks for the other teams on the schedule. And then we're going to get into our final kind of judgment here. Where do we think Florida State what can they do with this schedule? So, man, excited to jump into it. Really starting to, get them fall plans underway of the games we want to go to. Got a couple circled on the schedule. So ready to jump into this one. But before we do that, how are you, my friend?
Oh, I'm good, Jesse. Yeah, man. So good to finally be talking about something of relevance to the football team, and that's the schedule. And yeah, man, when you look at this schedule, it's easy to look at it and say, okay, yeah, all right, ACC, I see you. Like, I got my binoculars on. I see what you
Yeah.
did there. Yeah, you still butthurt, aren't you? Yeah, I see what you did to Florida State for sure. I definitely think the ACC was Jim Phillips was like, yeah, have this Florida State and take it where the sun don't shine with this schedule. Not for like the severity of difficulty, but more of how they place the games and
Yeah.
the bye weeks, and just how they worked it all out. Just just add a little bit more sauce to that lawsuit there. But we'll get into all of that. And this schedule right now, has both of us feeling certain ways. Now, again, like Jesse said, we won't be able to really know or be able to like give you like hard concrete feelings either way about W's and L's. But at this stage of the game of where we think Florida State's at, we can make a little bit of fun, way too early predictions.
Exactly. We're just going to have fun with it tonight. That's why another reason why we wanted to go live so we can maybe take a few questions during this and some comments and things like that. Michael, everybody hates their schedule when it comes out. Everybody always thinks like we got screwed one way or the other. I don't love these non-Saturday games. I don't like the Friday games, where this is the ACC continues with this kind of high school BS of putting games on Friday nights and whatnot. But I understand why they're doing it. They're trying to get some primetime slots because they know they are kind of the little brother of the TV partners to the SEC. And so I get it. I just don't like it. And of course, we get two of them both on the road. So not my favorite there. But again, man, like I said, I'm just excited to kind of know the layout of things. Got some big games, some big home games, a couple of big away games here. But before we jump into our overall thoughts, let me just bring you guys a quick word from today's sponsor, and that is Alumni Hall FSU. Look, no matter what game you're going to, no matter what you like the schedule, you're always going to like Alumni Hall's gear. If you're in Tallahassee, you can check them out at 1415 Timber Lane Road. You can also shop online at alumnihall.com and navigate over to the FSU page. Make sure you save 10% by using code SPEAR. So we appreciate you guys supporting those that support us. So I think the very first thing we should do is let's just take a look at the schedule. Now, most of you guys have probably already seen this. You probably already know the games that we're going to talk about here. But let's just kind of get our footing here and look at how things are shaking out. So for 2025, obviously, we know game one starts out August 30th against Alabama. Then we go to September the 6th with a game against East Texas A&M. I know most people are like, Texas A&M? No, it's East Texas A&M. And most people are like, well, who is that?
Who's that?
And then I usually tell them, well, it used to be Texas A&M Commerce, and they just changed their name. And then they're usually like, that doesn't really help. I still don't know who that is. irregardless, it's a bad FCS team. Look, we need that one to get a win under our belt there. So then you get a bye week. Then you go into Kent State, another kind of game. I really didn't love how they packed these two easy games back to back like this, but we'll get into some thoughts on that in a second. Of course, then we have ACC opener against Virginia, trip up to Charlottesville on Friday night. Of course, the big one on the schedule after that Alabama game is the rival Miami coming into Doak on October 4th, followed by a October 11th game versus the Pitt Panthers. Of course, Florida State is going to make its first trip all the way out west with the new ACC members going to Stanford on October the 18th. Then we start off November with a home game against Wake Forest, and it is Road Warrior time, Michael. We got at Clemson, November the 8th. You get Virginia Tech at home, and then 2 road games to end the season. NC State, November 21st, another Friday night game in Carter Finley. Hate that setup. You know that's a pit of misery for Florida State fans. And then, of course, you end your season there, your regular season. Let's hope that's not the end of the season again this year. But you end the regular season there at Florida in the Swamp. So I think the first thing, let's do this, Michael. Let's first go over some overall thoughts on the layout before we get into some game-by-game breakdowns here. Now, when I shared, I'll start with sharing some overall thoughts on this layout. Now, I think the first thing, obviously, that stands out is that Alabama game coming up right out of the gate, August the 30th. It is a tough test to open up the 2025 season. Not the way a lot of us would have chosen to open up the season. You know, again, I really, really wish we could have put that East Texas A&M game in week 0 as a tune-up game before that. We saw in the past how Duquesne kind of helped you get in rhythm for that LSU opener a few years ago. But it is what it is. So you got a massive measuring stick coming up in week 1 against Alabama. Now, that's not the same Alabama team that we're used to of the past. At least last year it wasn't. It was not Saban's Alabama. But the point is, they were still on the doorsteps of the playoffs. They were still one of the first 2 teams out. So that's still a very, very good team there coming into Doak Campbell for week 1. And I look at it like this, Michael. If you win that game, okay, Mike, all right, we are really cooking early in the season. We might surprise some people. You will send shockwaves across college football. Florida State looks to be a contender this year. If you were to lose a close game there, it's not ideal because this is Florida State. We're not here to lose any games. But it doesn't completely wreck your season. You could still be a contender for the ACC and have a good year, because if you were to lose that game, say, I don't know, 31-28 or something like that, I mean, let's be honest. Alabama's probably top, outside of maybe Clemson or Miami, is probably going to be one of the better teams that you would face as far as ACC competition. So if you keep it there, you feel pretty good where you're at. If you get blown out in that game, buckle up, because you could probably just assume at that point, look, man, let's just make a decent bowl game and let's see if we can pick up the pieces. But again, we're going to talk about that coming up in a minute. Now, as far as that Alabama game goes, the pressure is on Alabama. Make no mistake. Kalen DeBoer has got to win.
Yes,
we knew following Nick Saban was going to be a tough task for anybody. But at the same time, let's not make a mistake, Michael. There's pressure on Mike Norvell too. Yes. And so he's got to win. His seat is much hotter, and he has to win right now. So tough test out of the gate with Alabama. Give me some thoughts on that first game of the season.
Yeah, I mean, it's, this game has been on the schedule for a while. They scheduled this game way back when. I want to say sometime around, I think when Mike first got here, or maybe a little bit before that, this game came out. And at the time, we were not excited. We were like, oh gosh, this is not good. Because the product on the field was like not good. Then they got better. And I remember I'm like, all right, bring Bama on. Let's go.
Yeah, we want Bama.
We want Bama. And then, last time we said that, then we went over to Mercedes-Benz and, proceeded to lose that game. Not bad. We didn't get blown out. Somebody blew out a leg, but, other than that. And so, this game is important for many reasons, besides the fact that this is a great opportunity for Mike Norvell and that new coaching staff to show that this is a different version of Florida State. This is not the 2024 version of Florida State. This is the return of 2022 or 2023, where we walk into that LSU game in 22. No one gave us a chance to win. we end up pulling it out with a block extra point to win the game, and that catapulted that team into a really good season, right? And so that's what you're hoping for. What you're not hoping for is to play, if you remember 2021, start out, had a really incredible game against Notre Dame, really came down to a, overtime field goal there. And then you have good vibes, and I know this is like a really sore subject for you, but then
Yeah.
the next week you come out and you just like lay a turd against Jacksonville State. So, that's why this Alabama game is important. We don't do moral victories like Moral Gables, but being able to either win or lose close, I think could help you at least keep the fan base interested. You get
Yeah.
blown out, the first thing to go is the fan base.
Yeah.
Meaning they're going to be like, all right, it's just the same stuff over again. And
Yep.
so you'll have different disinterested fans. Then the next two games, which I know we're going to get into, are not games that people are traveling all across the state to get to.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's not good. That's
Especially
why
if you're
you need to
coming
win
off
this game.
especially if you're coming off like a blowout loss, it's
Yeah,
gonna be, "Oh, here we go again, same thing. How soon can we fire Mike?" and all this
that's
stuff.
right.
So, you need that, and I was actually commenting back and forth with one of our subscribers before we jumped on here, and we were talking about how I think this is for perception and confidence within the program,
Yeah,
for a program that really needs something positive to happen from those 2 aspects
that's
anyway.
right.
And the point that they made was a good point where, yes, you can look back to Clemson last year, right? Got their doors blown off against Georgia in the first game, like 34-3, lost by 31 points. And then at the same time, they also lose that last game of the season against South Carolina, but they were still able to win the ACC and make the playoffs. So the fact that this game doesn't wreck your season is proof from Clemson last year. But
That's right.
the point is, you also would really hurt yourself for an at-large bid. So if
Oh
you
yeah,
lose this game and in bad fashion, Clemson, without going and winning the ACC and getting that automatic qualifier bid, they're not in the playoffs.
that's right.
So you pretty much you put yourself behind the 8 ball. Not that we're saying this is a playoff team this year, but to get to there, you're going to have to just about run the table in the ACC there as well. So now, after that Alabama game, which again is a huge one, and Doak is going to be rocking for that game. I
That's right.
cannot wait.
It's gonna be
You know,
great.
it's going to be awesome, man. Hopefully, it's done. We're back to like 70,000 capacity.
Yes, yes,
And, even if it's a really hard fought game, again, no moral victories. We're not wanting to lose any games here. But, man, that 2011 Oklahoma game, I was there. It was absolutely nuts. We lost a close one, but that's a game that still lives in my memory
yeah,
forever with just how insane that was.
yep.
So, first comment here, I just want to say, says, "What's up to Panama Jack here? High expectations, 10-2 for me."
Oof.
Drop your expectations in the comments if you're
Yeah,
watching
please.
live on YouTube and Facebook. Let's see what you guys got to say. We'll get to ours later in our final verdict here. But, Michael, after that Alabama game, the good thing is, and originally I wasn't too happy about this early season layout, right? I wanted a minimum of that FCS game up front, but we knew that wasn't going to happen anyway. I didn't like the bye week after Kent State. I think Kent State maybe you could have put like before the Florida game
Yeah,
or something like that. But if I had to talk myself into it, the good thing is about that Alabama game being followed up by 2 very winnable games in September is at least you get a chance to recover from that Alabama game, good or bad. There is no emotional, not really a risk of an emotional hangover type of trap game from either a big win or an emotional loss. Now, no, after last year, we can't pencil in anything. But
that's
if you
right.
lose one of them 2 games, look, fire everybody. Let's just come back, cancel the rest of the season. We'll come back in 2026. You cannot lose either one of those games. You need to dominate both of those games. There's not a whole lot to say about those. Obviously, one was a bad FCS team, 3-9, I believe, last year. We're going to go through every team individually. Kent State 0-12 last year. So I do like with a bye week in the middle. I hate that bye week there. I
Yeah.
think it's kind of a waste. I would have rather had that after Kent State
Yep.
because then you would get that extra time before the short week
That's
going
right.
up to Virginia. So
That's
I
right.
don't like that. But I do like the fact that with no matter what happens in that Alabama game, you need to be competitive, but you get 2 tune-up games and a bye week to really get in rhythm, to really get in sync, which is something we didn't have last year.
That's right.
And so you come off that emotional loss over in Dublin to Georgia Tech. You come back against a solid Boston College team. You
That's
lose
right.
that game. Things start to spiral. You lose Memphis, and all of a sudden, we're off the road in the ditch and on fire.
Right.
So at least by the end of these 3 weeks after the Alabama game, that no matter what happens, that game is in the rearview mirror.
That's
You
right.
should be in sync. You should have your depth chart figured out. You should have a lot of chances to work on things so you can go up to Charlottesville looking like a competent team to ready to win your ACC opener there. Now, those two games, there's not a whole lot to say, but I don't know, man. I don't love them there, but I guess I can get the point where early season momentum can be really good for a program that has a lot of questions to figure out with a new staff and a lot of new players. So give me some thoughts on those two kind of cupcake sandwich there early. We're busting the die early with some
Yeah.
cupcakes, Michael.
We are. And, I don't like them there either. I've always loved the schedule of where we had one cupcake early and one right before Florida. I really like that because it gave you a chance to kind of recuperate, get some younger guys in, rest your stars a little bit for that big game, especially this year now that Florida State's headed to the Swamp. But I will say, though, I don't like it, but I'm also like, two things can be true at the same time. I don't like it, but I'm grateful for it. And here's
Right.
why.
Same here. Yeah.
I'm grateful for it because regardless of what happens in that Alabama game, if Florida State were to win that game, now you have two additional wins that you can get and be 3-0, go into the bye week. Whatever injuries that kind of happen in that first 3 weeks, whatever corrections you need to make, you got that. I'm sorry, the first two games. You got the first two games, and then you go to the bye week, which I hate that. But you get that East Texas. I keep wanting to say East Tennessee. I don't know why. You get that East Texas A&M game, go into the bye week, come out of that bye week, and basically week 3 or basically week 4 is, Kent State is not like, they're not like low FCS terrible. They're G5 terrible. But like, you can almost kind of treat that as a bye week as well.
Right.
If you can get your starters in, you can get up to a really good score by halftime. You can rest your starters, get some of those young guys in, gives you an opportunity to basically use it as another spring kind of feel to that with real competition. And then it makes it easier for that short week where you're going up to Virginia on that Friday. So, it's not ideal. I hate it. The ACC definitely put a knife in our back with that one. But I will say that there is some gratitude to be had, because then it'd be nice. It would be amazing to go into that Virginia game 3-0. If you go in at 2-1, even 2-1 with a close loss to Alabama isn't demoralizing. Let's say you get blown out by Alabama, Jesse, let's say it's a 42-10, 42-3, game, 42-14, whatever it is, okay, which would be bad. It gives you basically 3 weeks to recuperate, to get yourself back together, to do the hard work of looking yourself in the mirror, giving that coaching staff time to figure out what went wrong, all those things, get in that game. And then that way, when you go to Virginia, it's a must win. That's what basically happens.
Yeah, and I agree. You brought up a point that that was another point that I made with the subscriber that I was going back and forth with, commenting on, was I do think with the Kent State game being there, like, yes, you want at a minimum a close loss to Alabama, but it would be great to have that upset.
Yeah.
You need to pound East Texas A&M and Kent
Yes.
State. It cannot be
Yes.
like, what was it, a few, like under Willie, where we won the one game, like the FCS game, or Sanford or something like that. It was
Yes,
like
it was
we
like
barely won.
yes.
46-45. You need to pound these. They lost
Yes.
71-0 to Tennessee last year.
Exactly.
You need to pound them. But you can get your starters pulled early, hopefully. And then you can also have some extra time to install for Virginia, because you shouldn't have to over prep for that game. You're probably going to run a vanilla game plan anyway. So I don't think it's necessarily a terrible thing. Also, it keeps you in the hunt up to October. Like, hopefully you get that win at Virginia. And I agree. I sometimes hate using the term can't lose games.
Yes.
That Virginia game is a can't lose game.
It's a can't lose game. I'm
You
sorry.
can't lose it, because if you lose to Virginia and you've already lost to Alabama, your season, it's
good.
not looking good at that point. Now, I will say, speaking of that road trip to UVA on a Friday night to start your ACC play as we transition down the schedule here, the thing about this is looking at the first half of the schedule, you only have to leave Tallahassee once in the first 7 weeks of the season,
Yep.
right? And so I like that. You get to stay close to home, you get them tune-up games, you get early season momentum. I do like that. But that also means that the back half of the schedules, this is what we touched on before, where that means you're going to have to be road warriors in the
That's
back
right.
half of that schedule. So you get to stay close to home the first half, but that second half, man, you're going to be on that second half of the schedule is doing you no favors. And
None.
that's saying that I like to use all the time, Michael. Sometimes life's looking up just so it can kick you in the nuts. And
Yeah. Yes.
that's the
Very
first
true.
half of the schedule versus the second half.
Yes.
That NC State game on a Friday night, that's the kick coming to the cojones there. So, but I agree, man. You cannot lose to that UVA game. That's just not a very good program. Again, we are going to go through the teams individually here in just a minute. But like we said, man, on the back half of the schedule, being that you don't have to leave home a lot, that also means 5 of your 7 home games are all in the first half of the season.
Yep.
4 of your final 6 games are all on the road. That
Yeah.
includes a long trip out to California to face Stanford,
Whew.
and you have trips to Death Valley, Carter Finley on a Friday night, which again we know is a snake pit for Florida State, and you have to end with a trip to the Swamp. So, man, you better get it together because the back half of that schedule, like we just mentioned, is doing no favors for you. So, gonna have to really capture some early season momentum, which I do like because you
Yeah.
hate, as football fans, you hate to be out of it early.
Exactly.
So it keeps you interested there. Then you have Miami after Virginia. You get a little bit of an extra day to prepare for them. You
Yeah.
get that extra day to prepare for UF as well. Now, Miami I'm going to talk about this later, but they are going to be coming off a bye week there. So you get one extra day, but they get an extra week. That is the earliest. I believe the ACC network said when they debuted the schedule, this is the earliest you played them since, I believe, 2008. So a little bit of a early season contest there against your rival Miami. But you know what, man? We were talking about it earlier. If you come into that game and you are, let's just say 3-1 or 4-0, that's going to be big because it depends on what Miami's going to look like too. Keep in mind, Miami starts with Notre Dame. Miami has Florida before they play
That's
you.
right.
So if both of these teams were to come in undefeated, that could be a game day situation. That would be a massive matchup between these two teams. But again, we're going to have to see how it plays out. But Miami is early, man. And so that's going to be, you got 2 tough tests in the early part of the schedule. But speaking of that, I do like that the toughest games on paper, because again, we don't know what these teams are going to look like quite
Right.
yet, they are spaced out pretty well with some winnable games in between them. So no matter what happens in some of these games, you have a chance to kind of bounce back, regroup before you go to Clemson, against Miami, to the Swamp and things like that. You get the extra day to prep for UF and Miami. So yeah, man, I mean, early season Miami and a lot of road trips on the back end.
Yeah, I mean, you look at that and you come out of that Virginia game or come out of that Kent State game, and then yeah, the ACC did not do you any favors. Hop on a plane for a Friday night trek to Charlottesville, where this will be only the second time you've ever played them on a non college football Saturday. And then, of course, you come back home for the big Miami game. That game. Honestly, I always think the Florida and the Miami game is its own season because there's so
Yeah.
much nerves and anxiety that goes into those games. We joke and say, Mike, as long as you beat Florida, Miami, you could lose every other game. That's
Right.
not true,
No,
but
it's
it
not.
does feel that way oftentimes. You can. Sometimes you can go like I've always thought if a coach went 10-2 and those 2 losses were Miami and Florida, I don't think it was a great season.
No.
I feel that way, but I still want to go 10-2. And so you come into that Miami game, which is going to have its own kind of just stuff to worry about. Then you got Pitt at home. Then, like you said, you get across on a plane and you fly all the way out to play the Trees in Stanford that you've never played before, I believe. And then you get a bye week. Then you come back home to Wake Forest, at Clemson. Then you got VTech at NC State, and then at Florida. And it's just like, again, the ACC I like the fact that, it's spaced in some ways, but the fact that you got to go to Carter Finley Stadium, the house of horrors for Florida
Yeah.
State, where literally Seminole dreams have gone to die.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the next week you got to go into the swamp. Now, granted, you have fared somewhat well in the swamp. You know, and so it's not as daunting
Right.
as it used to be. But yeah, I mean, it's you got to get all the early wins that you could possibly get, because that back half is looking up at you, ready to kick you in the schneiden.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that NC State, for those of you who have been FSU fans for a while, I mean, you know how tough it is. And we are
Mm.
1-5 in the last 6 games
Ish.
versus NC State, and 0-3 in the last trips up there to Carter Finley. So let's catch up on a couple of comments real quick here. Jeff Rains, our guy, says that if this team plays expected, I could see 11-2, but Mike must win at least 8 games to be safe for 2026. That's real optimistic, Jeff. I'm not going to lie to you. We're going to give kind of where we feel this team is at, again, without seeing anything come together yet. And we're also going to talk a little bit about where this team needs to be for him to be safe. So we're going to get into that later in the show with our final verdict. Matthew Sims here says 8-4, calling it now. Matthew, I'm with you. That's about where I'm thinking things are going to end up. Hopefully they surprise to the upside more than anything.
Yeah.
And then we have here from Panama Jack chimes in and says, I believe coaching will help us beat Miami and Florida.
It better.
Hopefully we have a much better staff in place this year, and that we can take advantage of that as well, because Mario Cristobal is still coaching Miami, so it's
That's
still
right.
you still never know. And so let's talk about this last overall view before we get into the individual team breakdowns here, Michael. And this is something that I found interesting. And if you've watched this show for any bit of time, you know that I talked about last year that schedule was harder than people give it credit for. You played some ranked teams. Every single team on that schedule up until the bowl games, besides Charleston Southern, had a winning record. So this year, you faced 3 teams that finished ranked in the College Football Invitational final rankings last year, and a UF team that ended the season with 4 straight wins. So you got some tough games on this schedule. Those 4 teams, that's going to be Bama, Clemson, Miami, and Florida, are all in the way too early top 25 rankings we just broke down on a past episode. But you also face 6 teams that finished with a losing record last year. That's not something you had last year. Last year, you only faced 2 teams that had a losing record. And guess what, Michael? You beat both of them. That was your only wins in a 2-10 season. So that makes you feel a lot better about where the floor is for this upcoming season. So, again, you got some really like firework, home, big, huge games in there.
Yeah.
But then the rest of the schedule feels much more manageable. Now, again, that's considering one of those teams with a losing record, again, is at Carter Finley and things like that. But you feel a little bit better about some of the other teams that aren't named Clemson, Bama, Miami, and Florida on the schedule.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think those 6 games are all winnable. All those 6 games that are on your schedule that they finish with a losing record, they are winnable. Just right now, just based on very little anecdotal knowledge of those teams and anecdotal knowledge of what this Florida State team could be, those should be winnable games. But I want to go back to in relation to this, to what our comment Jeff Rain said. 8-4 is the absolute bare. When I'm looking at this schedule, Jesse, I can see 8-4.
Yep.
I can see 8-4. I can guarantee you the 4 losses if we go 8-4 right now, right? And I can guarantee you the 6 wins. But they're going to have to get 2 somewhere, and it's going to be a hard game, right? And if it is not 8-4, if it is lower than that, then at the end of the season, we are likely talking about whether or not Mike Norvell will be back, because you can't go any less than this. This schedule is set up for you at the bare minimum to go 8-4. 8-4 the way it's set up.
Yeah, I'm going to share a little bit more of my thoughts on that in the final verdict. We differ a little bit, but very little here.
Yeah.
But let's just real quick, for those joining, let's do a rundown real quick of the schedule for those that are just joining. Obviously, again, we're going to go team by team here, starting with Alabama game 1 on August the 30th here. So coming into this one, look, again, like we said, this is not Saban's Bama anymore. Now, obviously, Bama is still a good team, man, right? Like they were
Right.
still right on the edge of the playoffs. They still have a loaded roster, one of the most
Right.
talented rosters in college football. Last year, 9-4, 5-3 in the SEC. This is a team that still went on the road and beat Wisconsin 42-10. They beat Georgia at home. They whooped Missouri, who was, very much a hot preseason team, 34-0. But then you look at the warts of Bama. 2-4 outside of Bryant Denny.
Mm.
Lost 2 of the last 3 and could have easily sustained a 5th loss against South Carolina if South Carolina knew how to finish a game, because they had multiple opportunities to win that game and messed it up. Now, scoring offense was still top 25 at 22nd. Scoring defense was still 10th in the country. So they were still pretty good last year, but they lost to Vanderbilt. They got whooped by a 6-win South Carolina team, only scoring Oklahoma team only scoring 3 points there. Both of us have cupcakes after that game. They get
Yep.
UL Monroe, we get East Texas A&M, so there's no look ahead or anything like that. All focus is going to be on this heavyweight bout between these two programs. Now, when you look at these teams, we're going to go through kind of the big picture changes, right? We're not going to get into their backup left tackle left,
Right.
but
Right.
the biggest change here for them is they don't have Jalen Milroe anymore. And for everything that Jalen Milroe is not, because he's turnover prone and makes some mistakes, and we always joke he's a running back at a quarterback position and things like that, he was still a dynamic player for them. And I would have been a little bit worried if we'd have had to face him in game one. He had 36 total touchdowns last year, 3,570 total offensive yards. He led them in rushing. And he just had years of experience. And so he could hurt you with his legs. So the thing is, when you go to the backup situation, and I actually want to highlight a comment here real quick from Alex Griffin, who comes in on Facebook with, yes, this is a good point, is that he read where Bama reached out to Carson Beck. And what does that tell you about how the staff feels about the quarterback room? I
Yes.
did see that as well. Apparently,
Yep.
Miami was call number 1, Georgia wanted him back,
Yep.
and Bama was call number 2. The point of that is, this is where I have the little candle inside of me burning that I think we can do something against Alabama, because they so far have not taken a quarterback in the portal. So they're kind of rolling with what they got. And no backup quarterback on Alabama's roster played more than 75 snaps in 2024. They have no experience. So you're going to be coming into a packed Doak Campbell Stadium on the road, making your first start. And sometimes, man, all it takes is 1 or 2 mistakes. Now, granted, we have Thomas Castellanos, who's a new quarterback for us,
Right.
but he's played 2 years of football. So he knows the ins and outs of playing the quarterback position. So to me, the quarterback question mark for Alabama is really going to be the thing there that can shake up this game. It might just take Thomas Castellanos breaking off a run or two. It might take their quarterback making a couple mistakes. They also lost their number 2 running back, who was second in touchdowns. They lost their number 3 and 4 wide receiver, starting tight end, 2 starting offensive linemen, and they lost a starting defensive tackle, a heavy rotational piece. They lost a starting DN, linebacker, safety, and their slot corner, and their starting field goal kicker. So there's quite a number of positions that they have to figure out as well coming into this game. Now, they did
Yep.
sign Isaiah Horton from Miami, who was a
They
good
did.
receiver for
Yep.
them last year, fired their co-DC and their DB coach. So again, this is not really Alabama coming in like full steam ahead, carrying over next year. They got questions to answer too. So do we.
Yeah.
But, they got a lot of questions to answer too, and we get them at home.
Yes. Now, they have a lot less questions than Florida State has to answer. Let's
Right.
be clear about
For
that.
sure. For
Florida
sure.
State has way more question marks than Alabama. But yes, they have a lot of questions. And when you look at this transition from Nick Saban to Kalen DeBoer, people assumed that it was going to go in the same way that the transition went from Urban Meyer to Ryan Day, where literally Urban Meyer, he had that 3 games where he, was having health problems. I'm not trying to make fun of him. And Ryan Day went 3-0, and then next year he resigned. Ryan Day goes 13-1 the next season, right?
Yeah.
So people assume that, DeBoer will come in, play with all of Saban's recruits, it'll be fine. And it didn't go as they planned, right?
Yeah.
Now, Kalen DeBoer is a great coach. That dude has won everywhere he's been. I mean,
Yes.
when he
Yep.
was at South Dakota State, I think it was, or something, he won like 2 or 3 national titles. Then he comes to Washington and basically has them in the national championship game in year 2 or 3. I can't remember what it was. Now he's here at Bama. He's going to have them pumping again. At least his
Right.
record seems that way. Okay. But they got their biggest question mark is at quarterback. They have Ty Simpson, Austin Mack, and Keelan Russell. That's their quarterback room. And the fact that what Alex Griffin said on the comment there, it's very, I mean, at least it's been reportedly true that they reached out and I'm not gonna say beg, but they were throwing brink trucks to try to
Yeah.
get him to get Carson Beck to come there because they do not, at least from what it seems like, they do not trust that room. So what that means for Florida State is none of those quarterbacks are scramblers. And that's always given Florida State the biggest headache. I mean, it gives most college football defense the biggest headaches. None of those are scramblers. So if they end up having to go with one of those quarterbacks, now you have a statue back there. Now, listen, Bama's got talent across the board. They have a talented offensive line. They're going to have talented, skilled players that they're, yes, like just said, they're breaking in. That defense is still, regardless if it doesn't have the same kind of bite as it used to have, it's still got some kind of bite. Okay.
Yeah.
And so they're going to have talent. So Florida State's going to have to come into this game locked and loaded, ready to go. I mean, Gus, you're going to have, I would imagine you pull out some fun stuff for
Yeah.
this game. And
Yeah.
if there's anybody who can beat Bama, it's
Yeah.
Gus Malzahn. He
I
has
know.
a lot of experience of that. So yeah, I think this will be it'll it, it'll be who can answer their questions the fastest. That's what this game is really about. Who can answer their questions the fastest? Because Florida State, while they have a lot more questions than Alabama does, they don't have as big of a question at some of the most important positions, meaning quarterback. Now, Florida State's biggest question is, can the offensive line block that
Yeah.
defensive line from Bama?
Yeah, and it's funny. It slips my mind all the time that Gus was the coach of Auburn during the kick six, one of the most famous
Yes.
plays. So
Yes.
maybe we just need a little bit of luck. I do like that Bama will probably be a run heavy team in that game because of the
Yeah.
new quarterback, and Tony
Yeah.
White's defense is predicated on stopping the run. So,
That's
man,
right.
I mean, you got Deuce Robinson out there, big wide receiver that's going to
Yep.
create some mismatches. You have Squirrel White, who, by the way, I think it was in 2022, maybe had his best game
Yep.
ever against Alabama, where he put up well over 100 yards. So, man, you never know. It just could take one or two plays to break your way
That's
that
right.
you could possibly pull the upset against Alabama. So, for me to sum up the Alabama game, I don't know that I'm going to pick us to win,
Yeah.
but it would in the least bit surprise me if we pulled off the upset, right? So I definitely think we have a puncher's chance in that game for sure because they're going to have some questions to answer too. Now, the next game we're going to talk about here, which we're not going to spend a lot of time on, East Texas A&M, 3-9 last year, 2-4 in conference. They lost 45-14 to San Diego State. Started 0-5. Two of their three wins were by a combined 6 points. This is a terrible team. Look, this is like Charleston Southern last year. We were terrible, and we still blew their doors off. You come out, you whoop them, you avoid injuries. One of the biggest questions coming into the season is backup quarterback for Florida State. So I
That's
think
right.
this is one of those opportunities where you can kind of see what the backup quarterbacks have. You can get
Yep.
them 2-3 quarters maybe of work to kind of get to figure out what you got there. You can start figuring out who that 6th and 7th offensive lineman is and things like that. I would like to see Chroma get like almost all the carries in this game
Yep.
at running back. So I think this is one where you can explore the depth chart. You can practice some things. You're not going to show a whole lot in that game, but man, you should just basically come out and wipe the field with them, go into the bye week, and get ready for Kent State.
Yeah, this should not be a game that causes you any consternation, any stress or anxiety. You should be able to go into this game. You should be able to work out your first team offense and defense in the first couple quarters, and then man, by gosh, I better not see that offense in the second half.
Yeah,
The first team in the second half. If I see him in the second half, then then something is wrong
right.
because we should be seeing these other players and the second string, third string players get in to get some opportunity. And yeah, I'll never say a win is or a W is 100% guaranteed, but you should win these games easily. These should not
Yeah.
be this East Texas A&M, got it right at first try,
Yeah.
should not be a sweat game. This should be an easy breezy game. Work out some stuff. I mean, dude, start installing for Virginia in this game.
Right. What you don't want to happen is this to turn into a North Alabama situation.
Exactly.
You don't pull away fast enough. You have to leave starters in too long,
Yep.
do some things with those starters you didn't want to do, and then you risk injury. That's just
That's right.
that's what you don't want to do. So
That's right.
again, bye week between East Texas A&M and Kent State. I don't love it there, but again, you get a chance to kind of just basically take the week off and have practice to kind of get some things right there. Then you go into Kent State. Now, again, Kent State, this is barely a step above East Texas A&M. 0-12 last year, 0-8 in conference. They lost 71 to nothing against Tennessee. They were literally, just when you thought we were bad last year, Michael, they were out of 134 teams. They were 134th in scoring offense at 13.9 points per game and 134th in scoring defense. Dead last, no wins and dead last in both categories, giving up 44.1 points per game. They do play at Texas Tech 2 weeks before, so I think they did make a coaching change there as well. So you kind of get to see they should never compete with you on the field, but if they get their doors blown off there, then you feel like, okay, no worries. You're coming off a bye week, for goodness
That's
sakes.
right.
Now, again, like I said, they played 3 Power 4 teams last year: Pitt, Tennessee, and Penn State. Now, those are 2 playoff teams. They lost by a combined score of 182 to 24. Wipe the field with these guys. Start the install for Virginia. Get your starters out, and let's move on to UVA.
Yeah, and I agree with some of the comments that have been made. Like in these games, yeah, Jeff Rain's there. In these games, in East Texas A&M and Kent State, Trevor Jackson and Brock Glenn should get at least a quarter each.
Yeah.
Because you know why? Because you've gone into halftime up 48-0. That's why.
Right.
That's why they should be able to get that. And with Kent State, the golden flashes. And I had to look up, like, what is a golden flash? So there's some kind of bird, whatever it may be. Yeah, they were absolutely terrible last year. You should not waste a whole install week on this. I mean, you should, maybe you should have at least offensively, like, I don't know, 15 plays. Like, just go with the opening strip and just keep running that thing over and over again. And defense, just play zone and a couple man coverages. We don't need to get crazy here. Like, let's try to get into Virginia without any injuries and having the ability to see where those young players are.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot to say about these games. You should come out, you should whip them. But again, it gives you a chance to get early season momentum,
right.
No matter what happens coming off that Bama game. And that's something, like we said, we didn't get that last year, and
That's
you
right.
need that. I mean, this gives you where no matter what happens with Alabama, you get 2 back-to-back wins. Now, again, you can't guarantee anything, but at the same time, that means you can roll into that game with a winning record going into late September.
Yeah. And the other reason I was just going to say real quick what's important about these 2 games. I mean, the Bama game is going to be the Bama game. Like we said, that's kind of its own animal. But what's going to be really important about these 2 games, at least in the first half, hopefully, is the gelling of the offensive line. Getting those 5 to play together with consistency, with camaraderie, with toughness, and saying this is the thing I've been clamoring for the last couple of years. These are the 5 guys we're going in the battle with, right? And those 2 games are going to help solidify who those 5 guys are. Because I mean, granted, you're going to start 5 guys against Alabama, and I'm imagining that throughout the game, unless they just are great in that Bama game, you might be switching some people out just to see where they are. But those 2, by the end of those 4 weeks, okay, going into that Friday game, Virginia, you should have solidified who your 5 are. That's what makes these couple cupcake games actually really helpful in that case.
Yeah, and one of the things I couldn't stand the most about Alex Atkins was how much he rotated his offensive line. And so hopefully Herb Ham does not do that as much, and you can settle on that starting 5 with your 6th and 7th man kind of figured out there, because injuries are part of the game. So you're going to have to figure out who your next few pieces are. So the next game here, you go to Charlottesville for a ACC opener contest against Virginia on Friday night. And again, I hate to use can't lose. This is a can't lose game. You got to go up there and you have to beat UVA. They finished 5-7 last year, 3-5 in the ACC. They lost 6 of their last 7 games. I mean, Tony Elliott, that seat's getting warm at a place that doesn't really have very high expectations. Now, they did beat Pitt and BC last year. 2 of their 5 wins were against non-Power 4 teams. Their scoring offense was 107th in the country. Scoring defense was 93rd. So this team, again, was not that great. They do get Stanford at home before Florida State comes to town. And then you get, of course, like we mentioned, Kent State. So they're going to have to prep for Stanford, because Stanford, when we talk about them, they snuck up on some teams last year, even though they were
Right.
terrible. But looking at just some of the notable changes for Virginia, they do lose their starting quarterback, who was also their leading rusher. So that is a big piece to replace there. They also lose wide receiver number 1 and tight end number 1, who were the only pass catchers to record over 250 receiving yards last year. They also lose their starting running back and their starting center, top tackler, and top 2 in TFLs from last year. So again, really on the offensive side of things, which was already the 107th ranked offense last year, they got some question marks there to find some replacements for. And again, like we said, man, Virginia is a team that we've kind of gone back and forth with, maybe more
That's
than we
right.
should have in recent years. But this is a program that has 5 winning seasons in the past 20 years. So you are on a different level than Virginia. You should go up there and win that game. Friday night on the road, I know that's going to complicate things a little bit on a short week. That's advantage
Right.
for the home team, but you should still go up there and win that. Now, again, like we mentioned, you can't just expect to roll the helmet out there. They played
That's right.
Louisville close last year,
That's right.
and they played Notre Dame way closer than Florida State did. So
That's right.
you can't just expect to win this game, but this is a can't lose game for Florida State.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I'm with you. I hate having to throw around the can't lose game because, I mean, honestly, as fans, none of the games are all the games are can't lose, right?
Exactly.
But at the same time, if there was a can't lose game for Florida State, regardless of what happens at the Bama game, this is the one. You can't lose this game. You just can't. Like you got to be able to come out of that week at worst 3-1. And at best 4-0. Wouldn't it?
Yeah.
We talked about this in the pre-show. Like, wouldn't it be great to go into Miami 4-0? Like the energy around the program that would be. Florida State last 3 trips to Virginia, they're 1-2, and they've lost. They've lost one, won one, and then the recent one was during the Willie Taggart era. They lost 31-24 to Virginia, and it's time to bring the Jefferson Epps Trophy back home, boy.
Right.
Let's get that trophy back home. We haven't seen that trophy in forever.
Yeah. So, I mean, I agree, man. This is one that you got to win. And when we get into the later part of the schedule or later, our final thoughts, one of the things that I'm going to talk about there is you got to win the winnables, right?
Yes, right.
This is one of those games.
That's
You
right.
have to win this game. So just want to say what's up to Mike real quick in the chat. He chimes in, says, "What's up, fellas? 10-2 or 11-1 in the regular season." I know Mike comments on our stuff a lot. He's very optimistic. I love it, Mike. Let's
I
keep
love it.
Let's keep the energy going. Hey, look, no one really saw 10-2 or 10-3, 9-3, whatever it was, 10-3 coming in 2022. So you never know.
That's
But
true.
Michael, the next one here is a big one. No matter what happens in that Alabama game, it's the biggest from like a on paper standpoint. But this next game is usually the biggest one on the schedule, right?
Yep.
And that is October 4th. You welcome Miami into Doak Campbell Stadium. Of course, Miami had a great season last year. I'm not going to mince that at all.
Right.
I'm going to give them credit where it's due. 10-3. Of course, a great season that didn't accomplish anything. Like
right.
you
Bro,
choked on a Pop-Tart.
What do you mean it didn't? I was about to say, what do you mean? They got to eat some Pop-Tarts, bro.
Like you missed the ACC championship. You did not beat a single ranked team last year, and then you choked on a Pop-Tart in your bowl game there. And fun fact, Bobby Bowden still has more bowl wins than they do in the last like 20 years. So God rest his soul. But you look at this Miami team, they come into this game, they absolutely smoked Florida last year.
That's right.
But they did lose to Georgia Tech. They lost to Syracuse. They lost to Iowa State. They should have lost to Virginia Tech. They should have lost to Cal. And I don't think it's as egregious in the Louisville game. Some of the refs, some of the calls they got there, but they probably should have lost that game too. They got some favorable calls there as well. But they got saved by the refs. And here's the thing, Michael. Bobby Bowden, speaking of, used to say back in the day, like, you can be as good as you want, but sometimes luck is involved. Sometimes it takes a ball bouncing your way, a call going your way. We know the ACC, with the way Florida State kind of, wet the bed early last year, Miami took the flag as kind of the playoff contender, the way Clemson looked early when they got, killed by Georgia. It really did seem like the ACC was trying to protect their playoff team with some of these things. But You can't guarantee luck every single year. You can't guarantee that they're going to blow a targeting call. You can't guarantee they're going to reverse a Hail Mary and this type of stuff every single year. So Miami got lucky on some of those games, but they were good last year. Now, the thing is, I've seen people already predicting that we're going to lose by multiple scores. Their best team in 20 years beat our worst team in 50 years by 22 points at home. So I'm not 100% sure how if we're going to win. We got to wait to see how these teams look, but I think it's going to be much closer. I don't know this is going to
Right.
be a multi-score loss when the difference in the teams last year, and that was Cam Ward's worst game of the season.
That's right.
But again, they had a great offense last year, first in the country in scoring offense. Defense wasn't great, 68. That's why they made a change at defensive coordinator. Now, Miami will be coming off a bye week into this game, but that bye week comes after Florida. They also have Notre Dame early in the season. So if they don't get it together, if they don't replace some of the things we're going to talk about here in a minute, they could come into that 2-2. And
That's right.
so, but if they're undefeated, that's going to be huge because they're going to have two really big wins
That's
over
right.
two quality opponents. So the thing is, I think what that tells us is we're going to know a lot about Miami really early. Now, the notable changes that you need to know about Miami, we talked about this before in the past, and Lord knows, Michael, how dare anybody question a team that hasn't
Don't you
won
dare.
anything in 2 decades? They get so it's the most sensitive fan base I've ever seen. You can't make any questions about them. But they bring in Carson Beck at quarterback. Look, he's not Cam Ward, but he's a good quarterback. I will give him that. But he's not Cam Ward. Cam Ward ended up being better than we thought. He ended up being kind of a generational talent there at quarterback for them last year. If it wasn't for Carson Beck and Cam Ward and a couple lucky breaks, that's probably a 6-win team.
That's right.
And he is coming off arm surgery. He's not going to be able to throw in the spring. He'll be back by summer, so he'll have time, but it's going to be a condensed window. And really, the thing is, not only does he have to learn in a condensed window, Miami lost 83.9% of their total receiving yards
Yeesh.
last year and
Gosh.
80.5% of their receiving touchdowns. That's Restrepo. That's Isaiah Horton. That's
That's
Sam
right.
Brown. That's Aurora, the tight end. They also lost their starting center and Jalen Rivers. They should have a good offensive line, although I will say Cam Ward's mobility did help them out. You know, he could stand back there for a month and a half and just wait for things to open up. That's not Carson Beck. He
Yeah.
can't do that type of stuff. You bring in Minnesota's defensive coordinator. He's only got 1 year at the Power 5 level as a DC.
Right.
He looks good on paper, but we'll
Yep.
see how that pans out. But as bad as that defense was, you lost both starting safeties, a slot corner. You lost a linebacker who led them in tackles the past 2 years. You lost 3 of your 4 top players in TFLs. You lost 2 of your top 3 in sacks. You lost the top 2 in snap count on your interior defensive line and a kicker that's been really good for them over the past few years. So Miami has a ton of questions to answer. So I'm kind of glad that you get them early in the season.
Yeah, for sure. Like I'm glad. I have said that one of the things the ACC did, which I do appreciate, is putting this game back where it belongs. I grew up with this game around that first or second week of October. I think that's the perfect space for Miami because it's almost the middle of the season, so you're not completely. You could still be in it. And it's not late where it knocks you out, and it's not early that it demoralizes your season. It's kind of right there in the middle of this game. And so I like it there, and I appreciate that's the one nice thing, if you call it nice, that the ACC did for us. Listen, since 1990, because we know Miami fans like to be like, oh, we got 5 national championships, and we got the all-time real record, and we play in a stadium for restaurants. Okay, whatever. Since 1990, Florida State is 19-17 against Miami. Okay, 19-17. Yes, we lost at Hard Rock last year. Okay, great. All right, this is the get back game. I don't care what Miami's coming in on, right? They're going to have Carson Beck, who, will have had some time to adjust to the offensive scheme, which is very much different than what he was running at Georgia. So he's going to have to learn a whole new terminology, a whole new system of wide receivers and running backs and checks and everything with the offensive line to get comfortable with them as well. And he won't have a spring to do that. So, there could be a possibility that they're behind and that plays into the games. Now, this is not me dissing on Carson Beck. He was a good quarterback at Georgia. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But before he got injured, he was not playing very well. Let's be real. He was not playing very well. So it depends on what version of Carson Beck that Miami gets that will, determine how well that game goes. Now, Florida State's defense with Tony White, I love the fact that, Tony's White defense is built to stop the run. Miami wants to run the ball, which sets up their passing game. They don't have Cam. They don't have Cam Ward back there, right? They're not going to have the same type of offensive line they had last season. They're going to have good players, don't get me wrong, but they're not going to have the same type of offensive line that gave Cam Ward 8 years to throw a ball. And so what I imagine is that if Tony White can figure out a way to slow down that run game, put pressure on Casey Beck, who can, get out of trouble a little bit
Right.
there. But if they can keep him somewhat contained in that sense, then I think FSU has a really great chance to get this get back game.
Yeah, and I will say that they do return 4 or 5 starters, and they will have one of the better offensive lines in the country. And Mark Fletcher Jr. is a good running back. So they do have some pieces, and they have recruited well. I'll give you credit, Miami fans, when you find the comment section. So I do say that, like, they have talent to work with. But the point, because I went back and forth with a Miami fan in the comments on one of our shows, where it was like, look, man, I'm not saying that the talent that you're bringing in isn't talented. What I'm saying is it's question marks, man. You don't know how it's going to work out.
Correct.
Look, we're still waiting on our 5-star receiver to do something.
Jeez.
So that's what I'm saying is, like, you got guys like Restrepo, who was a guy who really overproduced every single year for them. And so those are guys that you can't guarantee that you're just going to step in and replace there. So I do think, like, if I had to pick one of the more winnable games, Carson Beck had 12 interceptions last year. He had 8 fumbles, I believe. And so I do think Miami's going to be good. Hear me, Miami fans, when I say that. I think they're going to probably win 9 to 10 games, but I don't think they're going to be as great. Hey, look, they don't play Georgia Tech this year, so they don't have that automatic L.
I love it.
I do think they're going to be pretty decent.
Yeah.
But I do think if I had to pick, like, out of the 4 tough games, this is probably the most winnable, right? That's that's kind of where I'm at with Miami.
I agree.
And I think, and you need to win one of these games. You're going to have to pull an upset. So Miami, it's going to be a big one, man. That's going to be a massive game. I think this is a game that you can win. And I will say that I felt a lot better about this game once I started to really look at Miami and I saw how much they lost. I was like, dude, they lost almost their whole entire offense and some key pieces off of defense that wasn't even any good. So I feel a lot better about that as well. Real quick, Brian Sullivan says, hey, y'all, love the show. Go Noles. We really appreciate that. And thank you for all of you guys who are watching with us right now. Look, we just wanted to come live on this show and break down the schedule with you guys, kind of have some fun with it, talk about all these teams. I've been doing a ton of research looking around here as well. And, wonders if they got the refs with them this year too. You already know it. But
you already know. They gave a great NIL package to the refs this year, just so you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they were the ones that, like, voted against everybody leaving. So, they went ahead and paid that bill.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, I do think it's going to be a good game. Corey says, he thinks it's going to be a good game too, but Mario's still not a good game day coach.
True.
And I agree, man. I think that is going to be one of the biggest things, right? That is going to be one of the biggest advantages here. Is Mario is still their coach. Hopefully, it comes down to a kneeling situation.
Oh, it'll be great.
And he forgets that that's in their playbook. Appreciate the comments here rolling in, you guys. Hit the like button. We appreciate that as well. So the next game we're going to talk about here, Michael, is that Pitt game coming up after Miami on October 11th, Saturday, inside Doak Campbell Stadium. And again, this was a team that started out really, really hot last year.
Yeah.
And then things fell apart. They went 7-6, 3-5 in the ACC. They started 7-0. And now only 5 of those wins were against Power 4 teams, and 3 of those wins were by a combined 7 points. They skated by a few. They should have beat Clemson, though.
Yeah.
Clemson mounted a late game comeback. But then they lost their last 6 games in a row, including a bowl game against Toledo. So, man, I know that Pitt probably has a little bit of a ceiling. They sneak up every now and then. They won the ACC with Kenny Pickett. Man, you got to imagine Narduzzi's getting stale up there. Like, seriously. But again, lost their last 6 games. Their defense, which is typically their strength, was 91st in the country in scoring defense last year, so not great. They do get BC at home before we come to town. And of
Mm,
course, we'll be coming off that Miami game. So hopefully, this isn't a trap game, because this does feel like maybe a trap game coming off of that Miami, either emotional win or emotional loss, which hopefully it's not as well. Now, they do play West Virginia and Louisville prior to our game. So we'll have a pretty good idea of who Pitt is. They do return their starting quarterback, who was a kind of a freshman sensation early in the season last year, but they did lose their backup, who played in 9 games and threw for a third of their yards and touchdowns. They did lose Kanata Mumfield, who was their wide receiver number 1, and he led the team in yards by, I think it was over 300 yards.
yeah,
He was like
yeah,
800. The next closest was like 500. Now, their running back that's coming back, he did put up almost 1,000 yards last year. So this is probably going to be a good running team here. But again, this is one of those games. You're at home. This is one of those winnables I talked about. You
yeah.
got to win the winnables. This is one of those games.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a winnable game. And, Pat Narduzzi is going to come in with his defense. He's going to try to have them tough-minded, tough-nosed. Them bringing back that 1,000-yard rusher plays right into Narduzzi's, desire of running that ball and being tough, play action, a lot of that. But, yeah, this is definitely a winnable game. Every time I think about Pitt, I think about 2 people, Florida State lore. Jameis Winston, his very first game as a starter, where the ball never touched the ground, and I think he completed his first 18 passes or something like
I
that.
know he had more touchdowns than he did in completions. And I
Exactly.
remember I was watching that at my house with a couple of my friends, and afterwards we were like, guys,
Yep.
we're going to win a national championship this year.
Well,
And they did.
yep. Well, we were on the cusp. We were planning a move to California from Kentucky, and I remember sitting on the couch watching that game. And when the game was over, I looked over at my little baby girl, and I said, "Baby, I think we might have a national title on our hand." I was stoked. And then the other player is Ja'Kai Douglas, 2023. Everybody's out. Everybody and their brother is
Yeah.
injured, and him and Jordan Travis just go off on that game. I think Azaria makes a game-saving tackle. Or no, I think it was Fincherl Cypress that made a game-saving tackle that prevented a touchdown, and that they end up winning that game there. Pitt's always has played us a little tough. Now, overall, I don't know if you know this, Jesse, but we have a losing record against Pitt. We're 5-6 historically.
I think they're one of the only ACC teams that we do have a losing record against.
Yeah, we're 5-6 historically. Now, to put some context to that, we played them kind of consistently between 1971 and 1983. Then we didn't play them again until 2013. So since 2013, we're 2-1 against them. And you won't believe this. We're the 2 wins that we got were on the road. We've actually never
Really?
we haven't beaten them at home since 1980.
Yikes.
Yes. So the last time they came to Florida State, they whooped us 41-17. That was Mike Norvell's first season during the pandemic. So we owed them a huge get back.
Oh, for sure. Those are, man, that the Men in Black flash thing, boink. I choose not to remember those years best I can. But yeah, I mean, I agree, man. You got this again. You got to win this game. Pitt started hot last year, was the talk of the town, and then they fell apart. So again, this is one of those winnables. You got to win this game. Thank you, Whit, for the kind comment here. One of the top podcast PTS out there. Love the insights, energy, and agenda free. Look, we just try and have fun with it. This is a passion project for us. We do it for you guys. We appreciate you guys watching. It's for the love of Florida State and for the love of our subscribers watching right now. So let's take a question real quick from Corey here. Quick question for y'all. What do we do with Thomas Castellanos when teams load the box and make us throw? Will everything be a read option, RPO, or can he make the throw downfield? Actually, he is pretty darn good at throwing the deep ball. I want to say I looked it up. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, and I'd take a lot of show notes, so I'd have to go back and look it up. But I'm almost confident his deep ball numbers in percentages, because he didn't throw quite as many, were better than Jordan Travis's.
Yeah.
And so you also give him Deuce coming in, who is 6'6", 6'7", and Squirrel White, who's a burner. I think you're going to be able to throw the ball enough that teams are not going to be able to do that. And again, if you can get him on the outside, if you can roll him out and move the pocket, that is the advantage of Thomas Castellanos, because he gives you that 11th man that you have to cover.
That's
if you take your eyes off him for 2 seconds, you know how dangerous he can be. So
that's right.
I think they will try and load the box and stack it up a lot, because that's what you kind of saw teams do last year when he was at Boston College when they tried to make him more of a pro-style quarterback and his rushing stats fell off a cliff. Look, Gus Malzahn's going to let him use his legs. That is part of the Gus Malzahn system. So I do think you will see him be able to move the pocket, a lot of RPO stuff. But, man, you got some good receivers on the outside that can win some one-on-ones and create space. And he actually, one of his – now, they're not perfect,
right?
But his deep ball in 2024 was pretty daggone good.
Absolutely. Jesse, there's two things I to answer that question. Number one, what do I always say about – what have I been saying recently about wide receivers?
What's that?
That we want big wide receivers.
Yes.
We cannot have these 5'8" people blocking down the field or trying to get open against defenses. So if they do bring, 7, 8 in the box to try to slow down the run game, Gus Malzahn is notorious for wanting you to do that. That's why he loves running the ball, because he wants you to put more in the box. Because what happens when you put 7 to 8 players in the box? You get single coverage on the outside, right? Yeah. And that's a wide receiver dream. Oh, they start cooking, right? Because now you get one-on-one matchups. You get mesh routes, and mesh routes are basically routes that are run about 5 to 10 yards from the line of scrimmage where they're crossing each other, and it allows you to not like, pass interference on the offense, but basically run your guy into the other guy, and which and when you're running squirrel right on a mesh route, right? You running deuce with that big wing catch radius on a mesh route. Holy cow. Because then now you got open field in front of you. And then, of course, like you said, Jesse, I imagine that Gus is going to have, a moving pocket situation. Yes, definitely some RPOs. He's going to have a way to scheme up to get Thomas Castellanos to be able to use his legs. But also, man, if they play 8 in the box, get excited, because that means good, accurate, deep balls are coming, and some really creative offensive schemes with some of the intermediate routes.
Yeah, and I mean, Squirrel White's one of the fastest players in college football, and Deuce is a mismatch already on the outside. Plus, you got Hakeem and a bunch of size out there. But I agree, man. I mean, you're going to have to get creative in some things, some aspects there. But I think you're going to be fine there. I'm really excited to see what this offense looks like, to be honest. You've given them some weapons. I just think it's really all going to depend on that offensive line.
That's right.
Last year you couldn't protect the quarterback to throw a 5-yard seam route. Like, you just couldn't do it. So it's going to really all depend on or a mesh route. You couldn't run a slant because you couldn't. It was like run.
Yeah, you couldn't even throw a less than 1 yard wide receiver screen, because as soon as he turned to throw the screen, somebody was chewing at his ankles. So
and if you did throw it, they drop it.
They drop
it. So hopefully we're over that this year. Also, real quick in the chat here, yes, we did score 80 on Idaho. I do remember that game. That was awesome. And we're talking about after the Nevada game. I was actually at that Nevada game. My goodness, what a cook of a game. That game was so hot. Man, the guy next to me was like a professor from FSU from like the 50s, and he had to leave. It was so hot that we were baking there. But let's get to the next game here on the back half of your schedule. We're starting on the back half of the schedule now with, we avoided this last year, thank goodness, but you got to take that long trip all the way out to Stanford. And, you saw last year where Miami went all the way out to Cal, and they struggled in that game. And it's a long trip out there. It can create some crazy things. You never know like how that time change difference, because that game was like at 10 o'clock at night Eastern time. It was way late because of the time difference. They had game day out there and stuff like that. But the good thing is Stanford sucks. They were 3-9 last year, 2-6 in ACC play. Now, this is the most head-scratching thing when I was doing all of this research, Michael, the most head-scratching of everything. Somehow, Stanford beat Syracuse and Louisville last year.
That's wild.
It doesn't make any sense, but they also got blown out 5 times. Their scoring offense was averaging 22.8 points per game, 106 in the country. Scoring defense gave up 33.7, 116th in the country. So they were pretty terrible. And I also agree, there should not be any jet lag in the Atlantic Coast Conference going out to California. This makes no sense. Hopefully we're out of here soon. Stay tuned for more details on that later. But looking at this game, here is one thing that's interesting, Michael. Now, we're going to be coming off the Pitt game. Then we have a bye on the backside of that. So we have to make the long trip.
Yeah.
But here's what's interesting. Stanford goes to SMU the week before us, and to Miami the week after us.
Oh, wow.
That is a brutal stretch for them right there. So I think, just they got a lot of stuff going on there. But this is a game that you have to win. I don't care if you're flying to Australia to play this game. You have got to beat this team. Stanford has not won more than 4 games in the past 6 years. You have to win this game. Again, like we said, they beat Louisville and they beat Syracuse last year. So don't just think you can roll out there and win this game. You got to show up to play. Now, what you need to know here is they lost their starting quarterback, who was also their leading rusher by far. And they lost their number 1 backup. They have not taken a portal quarterback yet. The only other quarterback who played for them last year has less than 50 pass attempts and had a PFF grade of 33.4, Michael.
Jeez.
That's dog water.
Jeez.
So that is not great. So again, man, they're going to be starting over. This is not a team that obviously recruits very well or is able to get a lot of talent. So you have to go out to California and you have to win this game. And you
Jeez.
got a bye week coming on the back side of it. So go out there, man. You got nothing to focus on the back side of this. Go win this game.
Yeah. So I just did some quick math here. Them going to SMU, coming back to play Florida State, then going out to Miami, 4,706 miles, over 56 hours worth of travel that they're going to have to be.
I hope they're collecting points or something.
It's wild. Now, Florida State's going to travel out there. It's going to be 2,600 miles to get out there, about 30 hours of travel there. Now, I've made that drive. Obviously, they're going to fly. I've made that drive 5 times now. I made that drive 5 times. And let me tell you, it is not for the weak at heart. It is not for the you got to be strong. Only the strongest survive. And so, I hope that knowing Mike Norvell and the staff, they've probably already done advanced scout trips, because I remember him talking about this before, where they would send their equipment team, their kind of travel team out like months and months ahead of time to go scout out the place, to find the best hotels, all that stuff. So they probably already have a plan as we speak of how they're going to handle that. But you saw, like you said, Miami went out there and struggled. I mean, if it wasn't for the refs, they would have lost that game.
Yeah.
And so Florida State's going to have to go out there and this is one of those, what we talked about, those 6 foundational winnable games. You've got to win this game. Stanford is not good. They haven't been good since Andrew Luck played for them. Okay. Or even the other guy, Kevin something. Hogan. I think his name was Kevin Hogan. Like, they have not been good since then. They are not good. You should go there. It's not going to be like a crazy crowd. Most of those kids are going to be in the library anyway, studying. You should win this game.
Yeah, this is another can't lose game. I mean, you have to go out there, and this is those winnables that we talked about. And you are more than welcome, Corey. Again, like this is what we don't get to do a lot of live streams because we both work full time and our schedules make it a little difficult. But I appreciate that. We love hanging out with you guys. This is kind of where we get to actually interact and do some kind of one-on-one stuff here. Maybe we are better than them. Maybe we'll get credentialed this year. I don't know. They turned us down before. Maybe we should start leaking commitments and ruining commitments, and then we'll get credentialed or breaking stories. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be taking shots at them. But, hey, it is what it is. But the next game here that we're going to talk about is Wake Forest. You come back home on the backside of a bye week. Now, before we knew the full order of the schedule, I figured that bye week was going to be around Stanford because the ACC said at Media Days last year, which there's the one credentialed event we get to go to, they did say that they try and give you a break, right? A little bit non-Saturday game or something like that to be able to recover from that long trip. Now, game 8, you get Wake Forest at home again. Michael, this is the winnable game here, and I just have to take a second to highlight this. That
I saw it too.
Encyclopedia said Taggart would have forgotten to get the tickets, and Fisher would have gone to California to recruit for Texas A&M.
I saw that.
That is a gold comment
with his Christmas tree.
It is the truth, and I will say this. I will say that although you lost, I think the trip to Ireland last year helps, right? Because now you've had that kind of experience there. But again, game 8, Wake Forest at home, coming off a bye week. This is a can't lose game. Wake Forest look, them Sam Hartman days are over.
That's
They
right.
have a new coach, but they went 4-8 last year, 2-6 in the ACC. Half of their wins were against non-Power 4 teams, so 2 of their 4 wins. Somehow, Michael, they beat NC State in Raleigh last year. I don't know
Don't
how that
understand it.
happened. So, I mean, we're going to talk about NC State later. They were terrible last year. So, they can win in Carter Finley. Hopefully, we can too. 87 scoring offense, 114 scoring defense. They do get SMU at home before they travel to Doak, and we're coming off a bye, so you got to win. Now, the notable changes here, there is a little bit to talk about because, again, massive changes for Wake.
Right.
New head coach, Jake Dickert from Washington State, comes in after being the coach out there 2022 to 2024, took over, I believe, like in 2021, maybe midterm, or 2022 midterm was an interim, got the full-time spot. 23-20 as a head coach. And keep in mind, they are not a Power 4 team anymore. So 10 of his 23 wins came against basically Mountain West teams, non-Power 4 teams, FCS, whoever they could fill their schedule with. 2024, they went 8-5 at Washington State. Only played 4 Power 4 teams, including Oregon State. I'm just throwing them in the bunch. And they went 2-2. They went 5-7 in 2023 out there. So, and keep in mind, this is a guy that had Cam Ward for 2 of his 3.5 years
That's
there.
right.
So, like, man, you couldn't win with Cam Ward. What are you going to do at Wake Forest? Now, here's the other thing. They did take a good bit of transfers from Washington State, but they lost their starting quarterback. But they did add 2 from the portal, Robbie Ashford from South Carolina and Deshaun Purdy from Charlotte, the guy who thought he was going to go to Florida and start over DJ Lagway.
That's right.
They do return a 1,000-yard rusher. That is the one thing that you need to know about. But, man, they were decimated. They lost their top 4 wide receivers, both starting tight ends, and their entire offensive line is gone,
Ooh,
including the center that we got.
Thank you.
Appreciate that, Wake. So again, at home, it's not the Sam Hartman days anymore. You got to win this game, and I think you should win it convincingly. So yeah, man, this is can't. We're saying a lot of can't lose games if you're trying to get to where you want to be, man. You cannot lose to Wake Forest at home under a new staff when they're basically wiping the slate clean in a rebuilding year. Can't do it.
Don't let off the gas pedal, bro. This is a cannot lose game. This is in Doak Campbell. Do you know the last time we beat them in Doak Campbell Stadium? 2018.
That's wild.
Okay. Now, granted, there was a pandemic in there that we didn't get to play that game, but the last time they came here was in 22. You know, that team that went 10-3 that we all thought was like really good. You know, they lost 31-21. Remember that game? We were all ticked off after that game. I think that was the culmination of the 3-game losing streak they went on there. And then they went on to win, obviously, the final 6. But yeah, it's been since 2018 since we beat Wake Forest. I mean, that program is so bad they made their head coach quit.
Yeah.
Come on, man.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the best thing about this that I will say, and I mean, gosh, I wish we had some kind of like holiday jingle or something. Like, this is a great Christmas present, is the fact that there is no more mesh, no more slow mesh. No, it's gone. Hopefully. Please, baby Jesus, please let that thing. I'm so sick of seeing that slow mesh.
I know. I'm wondering if they're going to run air raid like they did out at Washington State. That will be interesting there.
Yeah.
And yeah, they did lose the entire offensive line, and we appreciate you guys sending us Luke Pettibon, who was one of the top centers in the country last year. So we do appreciate that. Now, Michael, the next game on the list. This is one of the big ones. You have to circle this one.
Yes.
This is definitely one of those 4 games that we talked about.
Yep.
At Clemson in Death Valley. And Clemson is a team that I know we have a difference. We don't disagree on a lot, but I have a disagreement with you on this one. I think Clemson at Death Valley is the hardest game on your schedule next year because Clemson does not lose much, right? 10-4 last year, 8-1 in conference play, won the ACC, made the playoffs. Clemson is the daggondest team, man. They not only does Dabo somehow convince these guys to stay for 16 years, even though they're a first-round NFL draft pick, but they can have a down season by all intents and purposes, and they still fall butt backwards into an ACC championship or something. It just doesn't make any sense. Now, you did get over the hump, and you finally beat them in Death Valley a few years ago. And I will say this was an interesting stat that I found last night, Michael. Most of you guys know that like I'm a paramedic full time and I got stuck at the hospital for like 3 hours. So I was looking all down the stat sheet last night. this is an interesting stat, man. Death Valley might not be the impenetrable force that it used to be. Last year, Clemson lost 2 games at home. That is and first off, it must be nice to be a Clemson fan for home
Right?
games. That's the first time Clemson has lost multiple home games since 2010.
Come on now.
That's wild.
Come on.
But we've only won there twice in the past 20 years, and it
Yeah.
was 2 national championship caliber
Slow
teams.
down. Slow down. Slow
So
down.
let's slow down. Again, you got over the hump by winning there in 2023.
Yep.
But again, that's a really tough place to win. The games that they lost last year, they lost to South Carolina late. I forget the other one, what it was there. But yeah, I mean, this is a Clemson team that doesn't lose much. Last year, they had a top 20 offense, 34.7 points per game. Their scoring defense was top 50th, but they got rid of their defensive coordinator, Wes Goodwin, who was an internal promotion. And they went out and they got a big name here. They got Tom Allen from Penn State. Now, real quick, they get Duke at home before Florida State comes to town. Hey, look, they ain't had a good results against Duke here recently. And they go to Louisville for a Friday night game after Florida State. But I promise you, they're not going to be overlooking us. We actually played them close last year. That was one of our closer games. And of course, we'll be coming off Wake Forest. So let's talk about that new DC real quick.
Okay.
Comes in Tom Allen from Penn State, DC in just 2024, only 1 year there, did produce a top 10 defense, 8th in the country. He was Indiana's head coach from 2017 to 2023, their DC in 2016 before that. And then he spent a season at USF as their defensive coordinator before that. Now, this is a hard read, right? It sounds really good coming from Penn State. And he's going to have Penn State had a talented defense last year, but he's going to have one of the most talent-rich defenses that he's ever had at Clemson because they still got a lot of talented players there. But he took over a defense at Penn State that had been top 10 3 years prior to his arrival. And, Manny Diaz had just left there before he took the Duke job. So he inherited a really good defense and just kind of carried the torch there. When I looked back over his history, now granted, this is why I mentioned the talent at Clemson and Penn State, because he did not have the level of talent at Indiana that he's going to have at those 2 schools. He has only produced 2 top 25 defenses in 10 years at the FBS level. And one was a COVID year kind of fluke. They were like 50th, went to top 25, and then back to like 80th. He's had 6 defenses outside the top 50 and 3 outside the top 100. So I know they're excited about this because he had a top 10 defense there at Penn State. I'm going to pump the brakes on this. We'll see, because he has not produced a lot of good defenses in the past. Also comes in, they lose Mickens, their starting safety. They lose Barrett Carter, one of the best linebackers in the country. They lose both starting defensive tackles, Peyton Page and Trey Williams, a key rotational piece at defensive end. On the offensive side of things, they lose Phil Maffa, who was an 1,100-yard rusher last year, big bruising back. And they lose their starting tight end, Jake Brenningstool. But, Michael, that's about it.
That's about it.
This, I think, is what makes Clemson so dangerous, besides playing in Death Valley. Cade Klubnik comes back again this year. He's not a world beater, but he's a good quarterback. Top 3 wide receivers are back. 4 out of their 5 offensive linemen return. Starting safeties back. 2 linebackers, both the ends. Top 4 cornerbacks are all back. They get back like 80% of their team. So, man, it's going to be a tall task to go on the road in Death Valley and get this win.
Yeah, listen, going to Death Valley is always just really hard. I mean, I went back, and since 2000, Florida State is 3-9 in Death Valley. 3-9, which is crazy. In the last 20 games in general that Florida State has played against Clemson, they're tied 10-10. That's it, right? And in the last 10 games that Florida State has played, Florida State is 2-8. So the football odds are all against Florida State going in there. But let me tell you, brother, I've seen the light. We walked in Clemson 2 years ago, right? And a glorious Keon Coleman overtime touchdown broke the seal for us, okay? I agree that this is going to be a difficult game. It's a difficult but winnable game. I'm not saying that this is a must win, but I'm saying if Florida State gets their junk together, they should be able to walk into Death Valley, Clemson Memorial Stadium. I'm not going to say it's going to be super easy, but man, they should have an opportunity to win this game because it is, the seal is broken. The crack has been revealed. Yes, they're bringing back some really great players. Yes, Kate Klubnik is back. Yes, most of their offensive line back. Yes, their 3 wide receivers line. But we saw last year, I mean, Florida State held them after they scored 17 points. Florida State against the first quarter. Okay. Florida State held them to 12 points on 4 field goals. They could not score. Okay. They could not score a touchdown, I mean. And so if we come back with the same energy, with an even better set of players and a better scheme defensively and a better offensive, who knows? If we can run the ball.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
I mean, South Carolina went in there and beat them last year. Louisville went in there and beat them last year. So it's not, I don't mean it's not winnable.
Improbable. Yeah.
It's just probably one of your toughest games because of where it's at and how much continuity they bring back. It's later in the season. And yes, I agree, Matthew. The Phantom call, that chop block, that was such bull crap. I think that was actually on Freddie Stevenson that got the call there.
Yep.
Called the touchdown pass. And then, yes, Jimbo actually called him out. It was, man, he went off on him, and I love that he did that. Look, for what it's worth, and this is a sidetrack, man, peak era Jimbo, I loved it, man. Now, what he did at the end, you know, he can go take a long walk off a short cliff or whatever, but peak era Jimbo was, I loved it. So, yeah, that was one there. And then I was at that game, one of the ones where Dalvin was nursing the hamstring, and we should have won up there too. So, yeah, but you got over the hump. And
Bro, we should have won the game, touchdown Toll-Feely, where he does the toe touch.
Yeah.
I mean, we had that game.
Well, the good thing is we kept John Papuchis on staff, and we blocked like 16 field goals last year. So, look, nobody was happier to see that 2023 win than me, because I'm going to let you guys in on a little secret, okay? I moved up to South Carolina in 2014, and I took a little road trip over to northwest South Carolina and made a stop by Death Valley and Clemson Memorial Stadium. Your boy may or may not have dressed up the statue in Florida State gear and took a picture, and we didn't win for like 10 years after that.
You jinxed us.
Exactly. So I won't even share the picture because I was like, I jinxed us. So no one was happier to see us win and break my curse than me. So I'm glad we got over the hump there. But, you know, again, you never know, man. You go up there, you compete, and you see what can happen there. Now, the next game we're going to talk about here is game number 10, Virginia Tech. Later in the season, coming off that trip to Death Valley here on November the 15th. And Virginia Tech is a team, man, last year, high hopes for that team. I had them as one of my top 3 preseason ACC teams, and it was a massive letdown. They started with a loss to Vanderbilt, 6-7 on the season, 4-4 in ACC play. They should have, or they did beat Georgia Tech, and they should have beat Miami. They were absolutely dog walking Miami until the end when Miami made a miracle comeback and the Hail Mary, the ref saved them. You guys know the story.
Yeah.
But Virginia Tech, man, this is another team that once I started looking at them, this is wow. Like, this is wow. Looking back. And I will say this, man, like, I have no qualms about Virginia Tech. It's probably my favorite non-FSU fan base. Great people. I really want to go to a game in Lane Stadium. This game was actually supposed to be in Blacksburg this year. And then they switched it, which I was kind of mad because I wanted to go to that game. But nonetheless, they come to Doak, and looking at them last year, 67th ranked scoring offense, 39th defense, which they actually replaced their defensive coordinator. So they replaced the better side of the ball. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense there. They do get a bye before they travel to Tallahassee, and we will be coming off that Clemson game. So advantage Virginia Tech there. Like I said, they replaced their DC, Sam Sefkes. I don't even know how to even say that, but I will say this. I was doing some reading last night on some Virginia Tech boards, and apparently this was their 6th choice. They ran through the gamut before they actually settled on somebody. He was in the NFL last year, linebackers coach for the Arizona Cardinals from 23 to 24. Also was with the Vikings for 2 years there, and then Wofford, DC from 2018 to 2020. So they speak highly of him coming from the NFL, but, you know, not really a whole lot of power for coordinator experience there. So we'll see how that goes. But here's where the thing with Virginia Tech comes in that I said, wow, when I started looking at them, I was like, man, first off, Brent Key he's on the hot seat.
Oh,
And
he has
they
to be.
got to start winning some games. But they lost a ton, Michael. Now they do bring back Kyron Jones, who had a great 2023.
Yeah.
And then had a really step back year last year, kind of turned into more of like a running back type of quarterback there. And, we still whipped them in Doak Campbell Stadium in 2023. Bashaw Tootin is gone. He was an 1,100-yard rusher for them in 2024. Really a dynamic back. He's the one that ran the kickoff back for a touchdown in Doak that year to get him back in the game. Also, their top 4 wide receivers are gone. 4 of their 5 offensive line are gone, maybe even a possibly 5th. Like, I had to cross-reference like players' Instagrams and look for all this stuff to try and find who's here and who's not. This takes a lot of time to do this research. They might be starting with an entire new offensive line, but I know they're losing 4 of the 5. And I think the 5th one that's coming back, boy, they don't like that guy. That's all I'll say there. On the defensive side of things, they lost their leader in TFLs and sacks. And that you're probably like, okay, well, that's a loss, but next man up. Goodness, Michael. The leader in TFLs had 19 TFLs.
Jeez.
And 16 sacks. Goodness. The next highest for Virginia Tech was 9.5 tackles for loss and 3.5 sacks. And they're both gone too. And so they lost their top 3 in sacks. They lost their top 2 in TFLs. They lost their highest graded defensive lineman. The top 3 in pressures for them last year, which combined for 45% of their total pressures, they're all gone. Their top 3 in interceptions, the only 3 to have multiple interceptions. They were also the top 3 in PBUs. They're all gone. Jeez. They lost both starting safeties, both starting cornerbacks, their 3rd linebacker. Now, they did add a lot from the portal, but it's not, super crazy here. Man, they have been decimated. And the last thing I'll say about Virginia Tech is I'm glad we're not playing them in Blacksburg. As much as I want to go to a game there, here is the thing that I've noticed about Virginia Tech, especially under Brent Pry. Now, we all know Inner Sandman, Lane Stadium, cool environment.
Cool.
They are good at home, 10-7 under Pry for 3 years. But on the road, they cannot figure out how to get over the hump. 6-14 in road games under Brent Pry in the last 3 years. Now, of those 6 wins, 3 of them were against G5 teams. Mm-hmm. And 2 of them were against 3-9 teams, one Virginia and I think one Stanford. So they literally have 1 Power 4 road win in the last 3 years under Brent Pry, and it was against a 7-6 Boston College team. So welcome them into Doak is a massive advantage for Florida State.
Absolutely. Now, here's the thing. I used to love Virginia Tech because, you had Mike Vick, and obviously we beat them for the 99 national title game with P-Dub and Chris Winkie and all those guys. It was great. But then, Virginia had this cool swag. You go to Lane Stadium, enter Sandman. It's like the really cool thing. Awesome. Then I was moving to California the second time, watching on my little, I was driving a big U-Haul, watching on my little phone as they ruined, as we got introduced to the Swag Surf song.
Hey, guess whose dumb self was in there? I was living it up, son. That was probably the coolest environment until we actually had to play football.
Exactly. Like, it looked so great. It was like, oh my gosh, Florida State's back. We got the swag. And then they kicked off, and for almost 4 miserable hours of driving through West Texas. If you've ever driven through West Texas, it's desolate. And watching that travesty of an opening game of the Willie Taggart era, I want nothing but to burn that program down. And so, last time we played them was against was the 2023 team. I mean, Florida State got up like 22, like nothing in the first quarter of that game. Again, they bring Kyron Jones back. This is a make it or break it year for Brent Pry, as you said. He's got to win. But I think this is one of those games, foundational win.
Yeah.
You've got to win this game, Mike Norvell. You cannot lose this game at home to this team, right? All they got is a quarterback and a couple other guys there. This is not a good team. And so, they don't win on the road. You've got to win this game. You got to protect the home team.
Yeah. And trust me, I was swag surfing, and we had all the swag until we kicked off, and then it was just a miserable existence. I would have rather been looking at all the cows and windmills in West Texas than watching that disaster. That was terrible. It was
Uh,
fun until we had to play. But
uh,
I agree here with this comment that says teams like Virginia Tech and NC State are going to get destroyed by
yes.
NIL, and I think you're
Yep.
right. When you talk about the competing at the ACC level and then the national level, this is something that we've talked about for a long time
Yeah.
with the ACC, and why Florida State and Clemson are trying to get out
Yeah.
is because you have teams like Virginia Tech and NC State and UNC, even, where for them sneaking up in the ACC championship game every few years and making a good bowl game is where it's at.
That's
We
right.
try and compete on a national level.
That's right.
We have rivals that play in the SEC that we have to play every single year,
Every year.
which is unlike any other team in the
Nope.
ACC. So I agree, man. And one of the things that come out is they really underfunded that program for a long
Oh,
time, and
yeah.
that's what led to some of their demise. So, I've seen Virginia Tech fans who are great people, but man, they were kind of like, is this just who we are now? Like,
Yeah.
we're just a
Yep.
perennial 6 to 8 win team. And I hate to see it for them, because this is one of the problems with the ACC is Miami
right.
turned into just a 20-year crap show, and Virginia Tech was hot for like the first 5 years and then fell
Exactly.
off. Those teams were supposed to buoy the ACC up,
That's
and
right.
it didn't happen. So, got to win this
Well,
game, man. This is not a good team. You got to win this game.
yeah. Yeah. And I know we're going to talk more about some of that other stuff later, but yeah, I mean, going to get Virginia Tech was supposed to be a boost to the ACC brand. And outside of what 1 or 2 years where they actually made the championship game,
Yeah.
they've not lived up to what they were brought
Mhm.
in for. Obviously Miami has never. I mean, they can't
No.
they can't even. We'll leave that alone for a second.
They won the Coastal one time in 20 years
One
and then got
time.
their teeth busted out by 5 touchdowns in the
Exactly.
championship game.
They had a generational quarterback that they've had in 20 years and couldn't even get to the championship game this past year. So like Virginia Tech did not live up to what the ACC had hoped for it to be, and understanding how underfunded that program was, and how also trying to live through that legacy of Beamer,
Yeah.
and then Bud Foster kind of took over from there, and it didn't work out very well. Then you bring in the guy that used to coach at
Fuente.
Memphis,
Yep.
didn't work very well. And then you bring in Brent Pry, it's not worked very well. And so, yeah, NIL has really done, and it's going to continue to do a number on a lot of these programs, which is why, again, Florida State need to get out of the ACC. So,
Yeah. All right, Michael. Are you ready?
oh,
What's
gosh.
the Bud Light commercial? Welcome to the pit of misery. Here we go. We got to talk about it. Game 11, November 21st, Friday night, inside Carter Finley Stadium. The heartbreaker for most Florida State fans. If you know anything about the history with Florida State and NC State, man, like, every time I have PTSD flashbacks of the
Good.
fat dude standing up, holding the pole, swinging his shirt. That's just
Oh,
that's
God.
all I think about when it comes to NC State. Man, NC State was terrible last year. Let's get that out of the way first. So I'm not saying that this game is an auto loss. Like, I'm not
Correct.
calling it that. I'm just saying that, it's really hard, man. I mean, you look at what they did last year, 6-7. And again, NC State was one of the favorites to win the conference last year, 3-5 in the ACC. They were losing to FCS Western Carolina in the fourth quarter.
That's right.
Mounted a
I remember
comeback,
that.
won that game. They go and they get absolutely blasted by Tennessee in Charlotte, 51-10. They were losing to Louisiana Tech in the third quarter. They lost, or they were down to Clemson 52-7 in the third quarter before Clemson basically put the cheerleaders in, and NC State scored a couple touchdowns to make it not look so bad. They lost to Wake Forest at home. They lost to Eastern Carolina in the bowl game. 3 of their 6 wins were against non-Power 4 teams. They lost 3 of the last 4 games. Their scoring defense was 98th in the country, which Dave Doran is usually known for having a really good defense there, which, talk about coaches you can't stand. I do not care for Dave Doran. Now, they will be coming off a game at Miami. So that's, we are going to get Virginia Tech at home. I know the Friday night game stinks, but they're going to be coming off a trip to Miami to come back to that short week against Florida State too. So I think that may almost negate some of them getting the short week at home there. But yeah, man, I mean, It's tough because we're 2-5 in the past 7 meetings, and we haven't won up there since
Ugh.
2016. They do return dual threat quarterback CJ Bailey, their leading running back, and their top 2 pass catchers. Of course, they lost their second best running back, and they also lost Casey Concepcion and 3 of their 5 offensive line. They lost their starting safeties, a starting linebacker, starting DN, starting cornerback. At least 5 starters from the defense are gone. So they lost a lot too now. But man, NC State is a program that you should win, right? But this is that team. This is like Georgia, South Carolina, or or whatever. Every team has that thorn in their side team. This is ours. It's NC State. This is the one team we struggle with. I was actually the best part of the ACC eliminating divisions was us not having to play NC State every year.
Yes. Oh,
So, it's funny. We were actually talking earlier today about I was trying to figure out what away games I wanted to go to.
yeah.
And I was like, man, I only live like 2.5 hours from Raleigh. And so I'm really considering going to this game, but I'm like, I need some backups. I need to travel in a tribe because that Wolfpack, I've heard their fans are terrible. And so, like, man, it's going to be a tough one. I think we might stand in the paint and go up there. Michael might even come up here with me, but we might have to stand in the paint and go into Raleigh. But man, it's going to be a tough one. It's going to be a tough one, but it's a winnable game.
This is one of those games again that you should win. Now I'm gonna put that right there, and then I'm gonna just listen. This game, every time it comes up on the schedule, I literally just I hate that week of the game.
Yeah.
I am, I love Florida State football. I love my Seminoles. And so I get nervous for every game. I get nervous for every game. I get extra nervous for the Miami and Florida games, right? But man, in the last 10 years, I feel like my nerves for every time we played NC State almost want to put me in a hospital because the horrors of going to Carlo Finney Stadium, I don't understand why every time we go there. I mean, the wildest things happen: missed field goals, missed tackles. We our offense all suddenly can't score. I mean, 2022, for example. Oh my gosh, we're winning that game. We started 17-0, and then everything went wrong. Went chaotic.
They lost their quarterback, and
we couldn't
score 3 points.
Couldn't score 3 points. And that place and the fans, oh my gosh, they drive me insane. Since 2000, Florida State is 5-8 at Carter Finley Stadium. 5-8, man. Okay. And then on top of that, the ACC was like, oh, NC State is a hard one for you. Okay. Carter Finley Stadium is even harder for you. Okay. How about this? We're going to put it on a Friday.
Yeah.
A Friday.
Yeah.
When Florida State has, Florida State, since I went back to history, Florida State since 2000, I think, is 18-10. They have a winning record, okay? Yes, 18-10 against on non Saturday games. You know who's given most of those 10 losses? Wake Forest and NC State. Oh my gosh, it is terrible. I just cannot stand it. But again, going back to the thing, this is one of those winnable games. And I would love and I'm a person of nonviolence. I don't like violence, but I love for us to win that game, and then Mike Norvell go do the handshake and just punch Doran in his face, just really quick, just like a hey, bud.
Just give him a little elbow on the way out.
Yeah, a little elbow. Just a little great. That dude, rubs me the wrong way just looking at him.
Yeah, I've just heard so many bad things about their fans. And after that 2012 game, I heard about bottles of substances that shouldn't be in there being thrown and cussing at old people. And I'm like, look, I promise you, if I go up there, I want someone to go with me because I'll go to jail, but I ain't going by myself. That's all I'm saying. So, I need some backup. That's all I'm saying. And yes, the slot fade pissed me off because not only did you call the slot fade, you called it the 5'8" Micah Pittman. You couldn't have called it to Johnny Wilson and let him go do a jump ball.
Why are you calling a slot fade to the shortest wide receiver in your stable?
Right. Drove me crazy. So, but the thing is, they were terrible last year, right? They were a bad team. And so at the end of the day, man, this is not a game that you should lose. It's not. You should go up there. You are a better program than them. I don't care where you're playing at. you should go up there and win that game. Again, they're going to be coming off a game all the way down to Miami, and maybe a loss for them as well. So we'll see. But everybody, like we said, everybody gets nervous going into a game in Carter Finley. So we'll see. I might be there. Y'all pray for me if I am. Michael, I might need you there with me to kind of back me up there. So now, obviously, the next big one here, the last one to end your regular season rivalry game, November 29th at Florida in the Swamp. Now, obviously, things didn't work out the way we hoped last year. I don't even think that game would have went nearly the way it would have been if we were just like, hey, we got the ball, give it away.
Yes.
Oh, we got the ball again, give it away.
Merry Christmas.
It was like the Oprah. You get a fumble, and you get a fumble, and you get a fumble. It was just the most frustrating game to watch. But, Florida, 8-5 last year. That is the most confident 8-5 fan base I have ever seen.
They won a national championship.
Right. 8-5 national champions, 4-4 in SEC play. Now, they did beat LSU and they did beat Ole Miss. So they did have 2 ranked wins at the time. But the thing was, they only beat 3 teams with a winning record. So most of their wins were terrible against terrible teams. You had a Kentucky team that was terrible, UCF, I think it was Samford. They had a bunch of terrible games there, terrible teams. Now, they did end the season on a 4-game win streak, so they have a lot of momentum coming into the season. They just extended Napier, even though most of them wanted him fired the first half of the season. And it's funny because a friend of mine who covers Florida was like, the most embarrassing thing I ever seen was like, as they aired the vote of confidence from Scott Strickland in Billy Napier, they were down like 45-0 against Texas. So it was terrible look. Now, the good thing is, yes, we'll be coming off that NC State game, but they're going to be coming off a home game with Tennessee. And so, hopefully that may be, they're either going to be looking ahead to one or the other, because that's 2 rivalry games in a row. So obviously you guys know it's going to be Lagway era taking over for 2025. He showed some flashes last year, but he was still a true freshman a lot of times. And I'm not really going to knock a true freshman a whole lot. You know what I mean? Like, because he's a true freshman starting in the SEC. I get it. But when you look at it, sub 60% completion percentage, 12 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 24% of his yards and 25% of his touchdowns were against Samford in one game. 40% of his yards came against non-Power 4 teams. And so I went and I kind of looked at as a starter in the final 6 games of the season after Graham Mertz went out. Now, of course, there's the Georgia game in there where he got knocked out. He didn't play much. He had a 56.2% completion percentage, 1,150 yards, 7 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 9 sacks. So he wasn't without some issues there, right? But I think he'll be better this year with that experience coming into 2025. They do return 2 of their top 3 running backs. They do lose Montrell Johnson Jr., who was good for them. And I think Florida's going to be tougher than people think because they are bringing back a lot, right? They did lose their top 2 wide receivers, which is big, and their number 2 tight end, because those 2 receivers that they lost, I know one was Elijah Badger, and I can't remember the other one's name, but the 2 that they lost were the only 2 wide receivers to record over 20 catches and 300 yards. So the rest of their receivers weren't that great.
Yeah.
And no, Mertz is no longer there. He was a grad transfer, so he is not there. They did take they got like a backup from Louisville. So they do have some, but it's not a whole lot of anything special there. It's going to be Lagway till it's not.
Yeah.
So they did lose their best receiving targets to go with them, but they do have some young guys that can step up into some roles there. Now, those 2 wide receivers, the tight end and Montrell Johnson, accounted for 61% of their receiving yards. So they did lose a chunk of their receiving yards, but they do get back 4 of their 5 starting offensive line. The one thing about their offense, man, when you look at Florida, they do not like their OC at all. So they are really pissed that they brought him back. So we'll see, man. And then as far as the defensive side, you got Caleb Banks is returning. He was their best pass rushing defensive tackle. He's a good player. Big boy in the middle. Beefcake Desmond Watson. He is gone. Cameron Jackson is gone. He was their highest graded defensive tackle and their best run defender. They also lost Kelby Collins, who was a 4-star transfer. Both of their DNs are back, but they did lose a lot of rotational pieces, 2 that played over 300 snaps. They also lost a starting linebacker, a starting cornerback, but they do get back both starting safety. So they bring back a lot. You have to go to the Swamp. It's going to be tough. They have another tough schedule this year, so we'll see, man. They here's the thing about Florida, right? Where I don't like that they had the success. But remember, everybody thought they were going to be terrible on the back end of that schedule. And they
Right.
ended up doing pretty good. So that
They
tells
did.
me like Florida State can overachieve like that as well. And so as long as our offensive line is good and we don't turn the ball over 16,000 times like we did in Doak last year, you got a chance, man. I
Right.
mean, Tate Rodemaker went into the Swamp and beat Florida.
Come on now.
So this is going to be a tough one, right? Because it's the last game. Lagway's going to have a whole season going there, and they do bring back a lot. They did bring in a new co-DC. I think you told me the other day he was from Jacksonville State because apparently
Yep.
Bobby Hill can't call a defense by himself there. So it's going to be a tough one, man. Like I think this is going to be definitely tougher than Miami,
Yeah.
but I think it's going to be easier than like going on the road to Death Valley.
Yeah. Well, I think I think Miami from a talent standpoint is better than Florida, and at least has a collective of winning that's kind of already happened. Whereas Florida has good talent, and like you said, shocked everybody because we all thought that they would not be 8-5. We thought like 5-7 was
Yeah.
definitely I mean, everybody, not just Plant the Spear, everybody,
Yeah.
national media said, "Ooh, this Florida team has got the hardest schedule in the land." And kudos to them. They were able to pull it out and, go win the 8-5 national championship. But yeah, this is going to be a hard game. I mean, the Swamp is always hard. Florida State has, they have a losing record there, a lifetime 14-22. Now, again, Florida had been playing a lot longer than Florida. But I will say, Jesse, since 2011, Florida State owns a 5-2 record in the Swamp. Just so people don't forget that, the Swamp has been called, Doak Central, because it's almost in Central Florida.
Thank you, Jimbo.
Thank you, Jimbo, right?
For everything he didn't do, he killed the rivals. That's for sure.
He did kill the rivals. That's right. So, yeah, with the 5-2 record, they won last time. Obviously they took Tate Rodemaker in there and, one heck of a game by the defense again. It's kind of that magical run that we saw the defense kind of go on those last two games there. DJ is the real deal. Like, we got to give that man his flowers. He's the real deal. He's coming into his sophomore year. He's going to have full reins of the offense. Billy Napier, Sunbelt Billy, they trust him. They're going to open it up for him. I imagine they did go out in the transfer portal to get a wide receiver to kind of help with the replacement of that. They also did bring in a safety. I believe he came from, I believe the safety came from, I think it was UCLA. That I saw. No, I'm sorry, Southern Miss
from UCLA.
Yeah, they got the receiver from UCLA. They got the safety from Southern Miss. So they did try to, in some ways, replace some of that. They did get Harrison Bailey, who, if you remember, he started at Tennessee, then went to Louisville, and now he's going to back up DJ Lagway. He's not playing unless DJ gets hurt. And so they're going to be good. This is going to be a hard game. It isn't unwinnable, but it's definitely one of those four that I would say, is a coin. There are four games I think that are losable for sure on the schedule. This would be in that, but it'd be the lowest of the four games.
Right. But it's not unwinnable for sure. And I do think this is a good point here in one of the comments. And this is something I argued till I was blue in the face with Florida fans last year was, man, that Ole Miss team, they got a lot of credit because they beat Georgia, right? But they weren't that good other than that. And then you also look at the LSU. LSU was not the LSU of, Brian Kelly's seat's getting hot because they weren't that good. But I also agree here that we had the season we thought Florida was going to have.
That's right.
And so it was like opposite land last year. So hopefully that's it. So that's all 12 teams. That's all 12 games. So Michael, let's bring it home with our final verdict here.
Okay.
We didn't intend on this show to go this long, but we're having fun talking about it. I enjoy it. You guys are hanging out in the comment section, so we're hanging out with you guys as well. So we're going to bring it home here, and we're going to kind of do our final verdict. Now, when I look at the schedule, Michael, like I told you guys in the beginning, right? You have those four really tough games. But again, last year you had a lot of good teams, maybe not great teams, but good teams. This year you have a bunch of teams that aren't great. You have a lot of winnable games. So I do see this schedule because let's be honest, things could go south. We didn't see 2-10 coming last year. So I'm not just pie in the sky all the time now. We got to be a little more measured this year.
Right.
Um, but I see this as a 7-5 to 9-3 type of schedule. You need to win the winnable games, like we've talked about throughout this whole show. Games you will likely be favored in. That's what I mean by those. And I would likely set that number around 7 games. I think
That's
you
right.
got around 4, the Alabama, Clemson, Florida, Miami, that you're probably not going to be favored in. So I think you need to win the winnables. And then I think you need to pull an upset or two to get where you want to be.
Yep.
If I had to throw a ranking by it, I would say where like I think Miami's probably your most likely upset because you get them at home, you get them early, they're replacing a lot. I think Bama's probably number 2 because it's game 1. They're coming in with quarterback questions. Then I would say, maybe as far as upsets go, I would think probably Clemson and Florida are 3 and 4 in there with UF being 3, Clemson being 4. But man, if you could knock off Miami and Alabama, then I mean you're sitting with a better season than probably a lot of us expect. Not losing to both rivals the second straight year would certainly be great. And the other thing about the schedule is with 4 really tough games that are very losable, there is almost no room for error.
That's right.
You
That's right.
cannot afford to have more than, say, one letdown, if that. And that's because you have to pull an upset in there, too. Like, if you drop that NC State game and you lose those 4 losables, you're now 7-5. And
Right.
that's borderline where we're going to get in trouble here. So the other thing I will say, and this goes back to what we talked about in the beginning, if you lose to Bama and Florida because they're 2 SEC teams, that's not ideal. But you could still make the ACC championship game and potentially snag that automatic qualifier bid like Clemson did last year. Got smoked by UGA in game 1, lost to South Carolina the final regular season game, still won the ACC, still made the playoffs. I'm not saying we're going to be a playoff team, but if you do that, you got to imagine you're going to have to win all but one of your ACC games remaining. And that's going to mean you either got to beat Clemson or beat Miami, and you didn't have any letdowns.
Right.
But losing the SEC games isn't going to hurt you from an ACC standpoint, but
That's
it is
right.
going to kill your at-large chances.
That's right.
Now, 7-5, 8-4 is about where I'm sitting, right? 7-5 to 9-3. That can look different, right?
Yep.
You can get blown out in a couple of games, and all of a sudden 8-4 looks bad.
Right.
You can have a couple close losses, and all of a sudden 8-4 is like, all right, well, I see the progress, though. Got some good recruiting class or something like that. Florida State, look, they need a good season to get back in the positive light on the national picture. We were so close to burying this after going 23-4, winning the ACC championship, but last year was a massive black eye on the program. Now, this is the one spot where we do differ here, right? And it's only a small difference. That's what I told you early on. I don't think 7-5 gets Mike Norvell fired. I don't. Now, anything less than 6-6 and not making a bowl, I think you got to fire him. I don't think you have a choice. The reason I don't think 7-5 versus 8-4 makes the difference there is the financial commitment you are going to have to send to fire Mike Norvell and fire this whole staff that you just brought in that you're paying pretty good, and then pay another new staff to come in. That is massive. You also lose, you're going to tank another recruiting class. So you're putting yourself even farther behind there. Now, with that being said, 7-5 is certainly not up to the standard that's acceptable at Florida State, and neither is 8-4. But I only say that because we went 2-10 last year, where I think 7-5 doesn't get them fired. But that type of season will not be okay going forward like in 2026. It has to look better. But again, 2-10 has us all jaded, right? Our confidence and our belief, our trust in this coaching staff and Mike Norvell has been shaken.
Yeah.
And so we shouldn't, as Florida State, we shouldn't be worried about Virginia and NC State and Wake Forest and Virginia Tech. We should never be worried about those games. But because what happened last year happened, we are worried about that. But at the same time, Michael, we talked about this before. It's a new staff. It's almost an entire new starting roster.
Yep.
So it's a different season. And so I do feel confidence. I am the most cautiously optimistic, but I'm still optimistic. And the last thing I will say is you have got to stay healthy. You have to stay healthy, because if Castellanos goes down or we lose a lineman or two, man, 5-7 or something like that is not out of the picture.
Yeah.
And so it's terrible, but Man, I'm optimistic, but I'm cautiously optimistic, and you have a very thin room for error.
Yeah, yeah. I listen. You make some good, valid arguments. When I break this down, I broke it down into this is what I do. Winnable for sure, losses, toss ups. Okay, and then I'll give you kind of my prediction right now. So this is right now. This is pre-spring. This is just based off what we know with nothing. Now
Yeah,
we're gonna come back later in the year and probably do a more educated of win and losses and stuff like that. But right now, I think your winnable games are obviously East Texas A&M, Kent State, Pitt, Stanford, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech. Okay, that's 6 winnable games. Like there should be no question you win those games.
gotta
You
have them.
win gotta have them. You win those games, you're going to a bowl game. Okay. Then your for sure losses, meaning like I just can't see a world. Even though I propped up the Clemson game, I just can't see a world you go in and win those games. If I'm just going with my heart right now, okay? Clemson and Bama, I just can't see a world. I just don't have the vision for it right now because I haven't seen this team. Okay.
Right.
And then I think your toss ups are, and I'll explain quickly Miami, Florida, NC State, Virginia. Listen, anything can happen in a rivalry game. We've seen it many times. Anything can happen in a rivalry game. So with Miami and UF, you got Miami at home, you got UF on the road. Anything could happen. I always make those a toss up unless they're like world beaters. This
Right.
isn't the Tim Tebow years. This isn't the Ken Dorsey year of Miami, right? Okay. So that's why this toss up. Virginia and NC State. The only reason I have Virginia in the toss up and not the winnable category is because it's on a Friday and freaky things happen to Florida State on a Friday.
Yeah.
And we just talked about the NC State thing. It's a winnable game, but it's freaky at Carter Finley Stadium. So
Yeah.
I have it as a toss up. So basically, what I said is to me, a must is 8-4 with this schedule. Must. And the reason why I say must is because, yes, you might be right that at 7-5, he might not get fired. But when you look at Mike Norvell's tenure, 3-6, and I know it's COVID, but 3-6 happened.
Yeah.
5-7 happened. The worst season in Florida State history, and like since dinosaurs roamed the earth and Florida State first started playing, 2-10. Yes, you take in 10-3 and 13-1 in there. But Jesse, if you did a blind resume test, right? You did a blind resume test and you saw that a coach went 3-6, 5-7, 13-3, 10-3, 13-1, 2-10, and let's say 7-5 or less, you would say that coach got fired.
Yeah.
Easily.
Yeah.
So why are we making yes, I get the money, but why are we making an exception for Mike Norvell? I love the dude. I want him to succeed here.
Yep.
But if you don't win 8 games, I don't know what to do with you anymore. You're not holding Florida State standard, and you've had 6 years to get it there. So that's why that. Now, so Muss is 8-4. What I actually believe they're going to end up going is 7-5. What I hope they go is 10-2.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of break it down right now.
No, I'm with you. It's way too early to be making win-loss predictions. We're just kind of having some fun with it. And you mentioned the 2 Friday games. They also both happen to be before your rivalry games.
Exactly.
So those are big time trap games. But I agree, man. I really do think, to kind of bring this one home here is like, I'm with you. I probably, until I see this team, like if they come out and surprise Bama, all right, we might go 9-3, 10-2.
Right.
They might surprise to the upside, which is what I hope. But I like this staff better than last year. I like this roster with what they did in the portal. I think they went out and, we've talked about this before. They got more proven players rather than big name backups. And I to one of the comments, I think this is where there's not going to be the lack of effort. There's not going to be the loafing because you have hard-nosed coaches.
That's right.
I think you got high floor coaches who are, where they're kind of like, maybe they're not world beater coaches, but they can get you some wins, right?
That's
and I
right.
think that's what Mike Norvell did. I think 7-5 is probably most likely because I think you're probably going to drop a game that you maybe shouldn't, like an NC State. But I do see us landing somewhere around 8-4, right? I do think you do pull one upset. I think you either get Miami or Bama. I think you get one of those two, and that would be awesome.
Yeah.
But I do think where you're going to land somewhere between 7-5 and 9-3. I think that's going to be, you know, I'm watching you, Mike Norvell, but I think you get 2026. And with that, I think 2026, you have to have a couple things, right? I think you have to, in 2026, you have to be in the ACC championship with 10 wins, and you have to have a top 10 recruiting class. That's the only way you save his butt. Like at the end of this year, if you have a top 10 recruiting class, then I think you got to be careful with cutting it loose, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, man, I just it's going to be tough. I think you got to see progress. Like again, like I
Yeah.
said, if you're 7-5, but you lost to Clemson by a field goal, if you lost to Bama in overtime, if you lost, to Castellanos got hurt, but you barely lost to Miami or whatever, and you got a top 10 class.
Yeah.
Man, it's hard to make a case to spend all that money
Yep.
to fire him. And I know money shouldn't be an option, but it is. It is. But
Yeah.
I do think this team can surprise to the upside. I really do think they can. But I'm gonna fall somewhere between 7-5 and 9-3, most likely 8-4.
So, like, let me just make a quick rebuttal to that, just a little bit, because here's my thought. What ends up happening is, let's say he goes 7-5. Let's say he goes 6-6, right? And they're like, you know what? We'll give you one more year. And so, like you said, it's got to be ACC championship. It's got to be 10 wins. It's got to be a top 10 recruiting class. Let's say Mike Norvell goes 9-3 or 8-4 that next year, right? Well, the temptations by the administration, because they make this decision, is going to be, well, look, there was improvement, right?
Yeah.
Right. And guess what that does? That makes us Miami.
Yeah.
That makes us that makes us Nebraska, who has one good season in the midst of some bad seasons. And then they're like, oh, look, we're making progress. Let's not fire anybody. This is Florida State. We don't do 2-10. We don't do 3-6. We don't do 5-7.
Yeah,
We don't do
you're not wrong.
7-5. Like, that's not us. And listen, we try to be very positive here. We try to be very focused forward on this show. And I want to be. Like I just said, I'm in Mike's corner. I am rooting so hard for him to succeed. I like the dude. But man, the standard is the standard, Jesse. And we can't, if we as fans start letting the standard down, we end up like Nebraska's and the Miamis and the old programs of old.
Yeah. I think 6-6, you got to fire him.
Yeah.
Personally, I do. I think 7-5. I'm not saying that 7-5 is okay.
Right.
I'm just saying I don't think they're going to fire him at 7-5.
Right. Yeah, I get that.
I don't. But 6-6, I think you got to rip the Band-Aid off. Now, what you can't do is fire him and make Gus Malzahn the coach.
Oh, please, Lord Jesus.
No, do not do that. I would rather you give Tony White the job.
Exactly.
And let him bring in a new offensive staff. Go get me Brennan Marion or something like that. But yeah, man, we'll see. I mean, we've got a long way to go until football season.
That's right.
But we wanted to go through this schedule, kind of give you our ideas on it. Man, we did not expect to go 2 hours, but I enjoy talking about it, man. I love talking about FSU. You guys were hanging out in the in the comment section, keeping it going with us. So we appreciate everybody watching. I enjoyed it. Again, we don't get a spring game, so we don't get to watch. We don't even get to see what it looks like. So we're flying blind into 2025. But I am excited. I think they did make some good portal additions. It's going to be interesting, man. I mean, it really is. I never thought Thomas Castellanos was going to be our quarterback, but here we are.
Here we are.
So we'll see how it goes. Now, the last thing I will say is there has been some crazy realignment rumors floating around right now. So we're going to come back with you guys for a Friday show where we're going to address some of those rumors. Obviously, that big date with the ACC of getting the extension through ESPN is coming up as well. So we're going to come back on Friday to make sure we talk about that. You guys make sure you check back for that episode. Make sure you check out today's sponsor, Alumni Hall. They've been rocking with us for a while, so we appreciate you guys. We also would appreciate a like and subscribe. We are closing in on 2,000. We're so close.
Out.
We would love to get to 2,000. So make sure you tell a friend, tell a neighbor, rate and review on the podcast. And again, we appreciate you guys for rocking with us. I enjoyed this episode, and we will catch you guys on the next one. You guys have a good night, and we'll see you on Friday. Thanks for watching. As always,
Go Noles.